Make sure Ms. Granger can get up here. Good morning. Welcome to our second full committee markup of the 2018 cycle. We meet today to mark up the fiscal year 2018 defense and legislative branch appropriations bills. We continue to keep Congressman Scalise, the Capitol Police, and those injured or affected in our thoughts, particularly as we consider the legislative branch bill later this morning. I look forward to a productive, efficient markup this morning, the next step in the appropriations process. We continue to move forward towards our goal of completing all of our fiscal year 2018 appropriations bills on time and in a responsible way. This committee alone will have already marked up 3 bills in subcommittee, plus 2 bills before the full committee today, and later this afternoon, 2 more bills in subcommittee. We've got a lot to get done, so let's do it. And may I thank everybody for the high level of cooperation. It's been my pleasure to work with Ms. Lowery and her staff, and thank all of you for your full participation in all the subcommittee deliberations. Now it's my pleasure to recognize the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee to present her bill. Ms. Granger, please give her your attention. Thank you.
For fiscal year 2018, Congress's #1 responsibility is to provide for the defense of this nation. It's the bill that fulfills the most fundamental constitutional duty that we have. The world is more dangerous and unstable than at any time in recent history. Our adversaries, North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran, continue to become more aggressive. Terrorist threats from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and their affiliates continue, and technological advances are creating new and more lethal threats. Since becoming a chair, I have made it my priority to listen first and foremost to our defense and intelligence experts so that we can ensure that they have what they need to face both current and future threats. The bill before you reflects the advice we receive from them. It provides Secretary Mathis with the resources he needs to implement his plan to restore our military. The subcommittee held numerous briefings, hearings, and hotspots meetings to ensure that we had the most accurate and current information needed to write this bill. It's been an honor to work with my ranking member, Mr. Visklosky. His knowledge and passion for our national security have been extremely valuable. I want to thank Chairman Frelinghuysen and Ranking Member Lowy. Your strong leadership enables the subcommittee to do what is necessary to provide for our national security. I also want to thank all members of the committee and subcommittee for your ideas on how we can best address the needs of our military. This bill incorporates your ideas and your priorities. The bill also takes into account the over 5,000 requests submitted by our committee and House colleagues. Today, if we're taking the next step, we will help Secretary Mattis' plan to continue to address military readiness, but also begin critical investments in increasing capabilities, lethality, and modernization. The bill provides a total of $658 billion for fiscal year 2018. This is $28 billion above the President's request and $60 billion over last year. The levels in the bill match the levels of the Authorization Committee. General Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, "The U.S. military's competitive advantage against potential adversaries is eroding. Over the last decade, sustained operational commitments, budgetary instability, and advances by our adversaries have threatened our ability to project power, and we have lost our advantage in key warfighting areas." This bill addresses his concerns regarding readiness and modernization requirement by fully funding in-strength growth requested in the budget, fully funding the 2.4% pay increase for military, $1 billion above the request for key programs to prepare our troops, including the National Guard and Reserve, for training, equipment, maintenance, spare parts, and base operations. Depot maintenance is funded at $16.6 billion to get our planes and our ships back in working order. $1.1 billion above the request for Army ground mobility, including $855 million to ensure our Army Brigade combat teams are fully equipped. $4.3 billion above the request to maintain our air superiority. The bill increases quantities of key platforms such as Joint Strike Fighter, Super Hornets, Chinooks, Lakotas, Ospreys, Blackhawks, and C-130s. $1.6 billion is added above the request to provide for 11 Navy ships, including 1 carrier replacement, 3 littoral combat ships, 2 guided missile destroyers, 2 attack submarines, and 1 expeditionary sea base. Full funding to continue the Ohio Replacement Submarine Program, $84 billion, an increase of $10 billion over the current year for research, development, test, and evaluation to ensure we can maintain our technological edge against our adversaries. $37 billion for defense health programs, including $644 million for critical research programs. Secretary Mattis said, without sustained, sufficient, and predictable funding, I assess that within 5 years we'll lose our ability to project power, the base of how we defend the homeland, advance U.S. interests, and meet our alliance commitments. To ensure this doesn't happen, the bill includes $28.6 billion above the President's request for a National Defense Restoration Fund. This fund is available to the Secretary to increase in strength, improve military readiness, modernize equipment, and invest in future technology, subject to appropriate congressional oversight. The Secretary and the Joint Staff are expected to deliver a new defense strategy in September, a much-needed update to the last review conducted in 2014. The results of that review will inform the investments we need to make and rebuild our military. The Defense Restoration Fund will enable the Secretary to make necessary investments resulting from that review now, instead of having to wait to 2019. We've had an incredibly compressed time frame to put this bill together, and we've produced a bill we can all be proud of. Both majority and minority staff have done incredible work to put this bill together, and we owe them our sincere gratitude. Without their commitment and ability to work without sleep, we couldn't have put this bill together. I thank the majority staff and minority staff for really wonderful work. Our military has made it very clear that it must have predictable funding. Secretary Mattis told the subcommittee that continuing resolutions, coupled with sequestration, blocked new programs, prevented service growth, stalled industry's initiatives, and placed troops at greater risk. We must listen to our military leaders and pass the FY18 Defense Appropriation Bill out of committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Granger. Mr. Viskovsky recognized for any remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairwoman Granger, first of all, I do want to congratulate you on your first Defense Appropriations Bill before the committee. You've taken the helm of the subcommittee in an exceptionally difficult year, and I deeply appreciate your steadfast commitment to maintaining the subcommittee's tradition of bipartisanship, transparency, and taking a thoughtful approach to solving problems. Also, I would like to express my gratitude to the full committee chair, Chairman Frelinghuysen, Ranking Member Lowy, each member of our subcommittee, and our incredible staff. It was just 7 weeks ago that the fiscal year 2017 Consolidated Appropriations Act was enacted. It was only 5 weeks ago since we received the President's fiscal year 2018 budget request. It has taken an inordinate and extraordinary human effort by particularly our staff and all those involved to get this act to markup in the full committee today. The chairwoman has provided a detailed and correct summary of the bill in her opening remarks. I agree with her that the legislation as written has the potential to fill many of the military's readiness gaps and maintain the strategic technological advantage we enjoy today. Further, I am in lockstep with her and am confident all of my colleagues on this great committee are that we have a duty to provide predictable and timely appropriations to the Department of Defense and the rest of the federal government, whether it be the Federal Communications Commission or the National Institutes of Health. Unfortunately, at this moment, I am not optimistic about the chances of this bill's independent enactment by midnight on September 30th. Most prominent of the obstacles facing this legislation is the Budget Control Act of 2011, lovingly referred to as the BCA. I did not vote for the BCA, but it is the law of the land. The bill we are considering today greatly exceeds the cap on defense spending established under this act. So much so that if enacted as written and the caps remain in place, the Department of Defense would face a sequestration of roughly 13%. The department still has not recovered from the rash of problems caused the last time we had to deal with sequestration in 2013. And the repair of those problems has been one of the prime focuses of the chairwoman and the subcommittee. Just to refresh people's memory, the department savaged its operation and maintenance accounts in the second half of fiscal year 2013 to continue ongoing contingency operations to protect military personnel accounts. This, for example, resulted in the Navy idling an aircraft carrier at a pier in Norfolk. And I would point out, when we talk about the dislocation of sequestration and continuing resolutions, we tend to think about agencies of government. I would point out I had lunch on that aircraft carrier parked at that pier in Norfolk with sailors from Indiana. And I asked them how their life was and what did this mean to them, and one sailor immediately spoke up and said, "Sir, all I can tell you is I just paid money to send my family back home to Indiana where they are now, and I'm sitting on a ship parked in Norfolk. I'm supposed to be at sea defending this country." And there are thousands of sailors just on that one ship. We are dislocating their lives as well. The Army canceled training rotations. The Air Force greatly reduced flight times for its combat-coded aircraft. And we had widespread civilian furloughs. We cannot let that happen again. We have avoided sequestration in the 4 most recent fiscal years by adjusting the BCA caps to make additional investments in defense and non-defense appropriations. Those modest adjustments, done in a bipartisan and bicameral fashion, provided needed fundings for our men and women in uniform, but also for our country's economic and physical infrastructure, public health, scientific research, and veterans care. The current 2018 budget, reportedly proposed by the House majority, will be superior to the nonsensical document put forth by the Office of Management and Budget in May. But it exceeds the BCA cap by $70 billion for defense, while spending $5 billion under the cap for non-defense programs, ignoring these past compromises. If passed is prologue. After this bill passes the House, it will sit idle until mid-September, when we will then again begin the tortured process of short-term continuing resolutions, shut down brinkmanship, possible increase to the BCA caps, and then maybe an omnibus. This is the very outcome the Secretary of Defense and the people on this committee do not want to happen. I hope that my predicted path for this bill and those that invest in the human and physical capital of this nation is wrong. And if I am, I assume Chairman Simpson will remind me of that fact at some future point in time. We need to reach a consensus prior to the end of the fiscal year, allowing us to break free from this cycle of uncertainty. Ideally, Congress will enact a full repeal of the act as part of a larger bipartisan effort to address the budgetary issues facing the federal government in its entirety. Doing nothing about Medicare and Social Security and cutting taxes is not going to get the job done. If the first 6 years of the BCA have demonstrated anything, it is that arbitrary caps on discretionary spending, which represent 1/6 of the budget equation, have had a negligible impact on deficits. They have inhibited needed long-term investments in our nation. They have threatened our nation's security and wasted money through the contortions, delays, and uncertainty it has created. Further complicating the committee and the chairwoman's work is that top-line funding levels for this bill were still ongoing negotiations as of Friday of this past week. For the second year in a row, the development of the appropriations bill was upset at the last minute by circumstances created by other committees in this body. It is a wonder that the chairwoman, the members, and our staff were able to assemble this bill, and we appear before you today. Setting aside my obvious frustrations with the process, I also wish to express my concern with the significant increase in funding that this bill would provide to DOD. $60 billion more, as the chairwoman said, than fiscal year 2017, and $29 billion more than the department ever requested. I support providing additional funding to the department, as I believe we are asking too much of our service members and their families without the necessary resources today. Also, to put it mildly, the world is very unsettled and not trending towards stability. That being said, I believe that the department will have great difficulty spending so many additional dollars in a timely, efficient, and transparent manner. There are vacancies in important leadership positions within the department, and hiring restrictions on civilian employees will slow the decision-making process. Currently, the department is in the midst of 4 comprehensive strategic reviews, including the National Defense Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review, the Afghan Strategy Review, and the Counter-ISIS Plan. Each is going to have an impact on spending in fiscal year 2018 that is unknown today. Finally, I would suggest, as I have said earlier in my remarks, it is unlikely that Congress will complete its work in a timely manner, and that any dollars provided in this bill will have to be spent in a compressed timeline, much like the current year. Given all of these concerns, I especially appreciate the chairwoman's cooperation in including bill and report language in the manager's amendment in order to meet our constitutional oversight responsibility and require transparency in the defense restoration funds. These funds account for $18.6 billion in the base bill and $10 billion in the overseas contingency operation accounts. The added restrictions strengthen the ability of this committee's oversight of the department. I cannot stress enough how important it is for this committee to exercise rigorous and effective oversight for every dollar it provides, including those for the Department of Defense. I would parenthetically add, it is our responsibility to do that, particularly when the Office of Management and Budget submits earlier this year to the United States Congress 159 pages of requests for potential savings in the executive branch. 1 page and 1 recommendation for the Department of Defense. I appreciate what they do at the department, but we have a responsibility we need to meet. In closing, I would again like to thank all of the members of the committee and our staff who have put in long, long hours to produce this product. As we move forward, I look forward to continuing to work with the chairwoman and the members of our committee to complete our work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Visklowski and Frank. Thank you both for your frank remarks and for your excellent work drafting this very important bill, and the time and effort has been mentioned of our great staff. After years of reduction to our national security budget, it's time to rebuild the military and focus on keeping our nation safe. This bill will help provide our troops and commanders with the resources they need to do their jobs, ensuring success in their various missions and helping provide stability around the globe. We must be ready and able to respond to any number of threats that exist or might arise in the future, whether it is from rogue nations like North Korea or Iran, emboldened countries like Russia and China, or a variety of Islamic terrorist organizations that recognize no borders. We must invest in the needs of our military to keep our people safe. The Defense Committee, led by Ms. Granger, Mr. Visklowski, have listened to our military leaders, a hugely impressive group, who call for more troops, better training, updated equipment, and improved infrastructure to make sure the United States military remains its status as the best in the world. In total, as Chairwoman Granger noted, the bill provides $658.1 billion for the Department of Defense. This includes funding increases for operations and maintenance to better prepare and equip our troops. The bill and Mark also includes funding to support research and development that keeps our military on the forefront of new defense technologies, especially cybersecurity. And it provides critical funding needed to replace and rebuild our aging and shrinking fleet of ships, aircraft, surface, as well as submarine, and other equipment, as well as restore vital stocks of missiles and other munitions. In addition to providing these physical and tactical needs, we also make sure that the men and women of our armed forces and their families are well cared for. This bill provides a 2.4% pay increase for our troops, invests in medical care and other important defense health programs, including increases for TBI, traumatic brain injury, and yes, greater investments in mental health infrastructure, as well as continuing to put money towards addressing issues which are very vitally important of sexual assault prevention and response. While this bill makes these necessary investments, it's critical that we make every dollar count, as has been mentioned, particularly when it comes to the Department of Defense. The bill reflects common sense decisions to save taxpayers' dollars wherever possible, but in a way that will not negatively affect the safety or success of our troops and their missions. In that regard, I want to commend Chairman Granger and the staff. We're working very closely with the Armed Services Committee, your authorizing counterpart. Again, I want to thank Chairwoman Granger, Ranking Member Visklowski, and members of the subcommittee for their hard work and for filling our duty, our constitutional duty, to our military that so well protects our nation. And I want to thank them for the effort doing so in record time. Just as the Constitution gives the power of the purse to Congress, it also charges us with the responsibility to provide for the common defense. This bill fulfills these two obligations. My pleasure to recognize Ms. Lowy for any comments she may have. May I say what a pleasure it's been to work with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have serious work to do today. But before I deliver my statement, and frankly, I hesitate to bring this up, but this morning, the President of the United States of America, the person on whom we are relying to sign our appropriation bills into law, again made heinous and vile comments about the looks and intelligence of a prominent woman to his 33 million Twitter followers. The President's behavior should be repudiated loudly and clearly. And on to the business of today. Thank you, Chairman Frelinghuysen, Chairwoman Granger, Ranking Member Veslowski, for your hard work on this bill. Our third full committee markup takes place with the majority having failed again this week, 9 months into the fiscal year, to advance or even produce a budget resolution. There is no apparent plan to keep the government funded or avoid a catastrophic debt default in the fall. And no talks exist to raise the Budget Control Act spending caps, which left unaddressed would wreak havoc on this very bill. The proposed spending bill shattered the existing Budget Control Act defense spending cap, triggering an automatic across-the-board cut of 13% to every defense account in this bill and others. Yet the majority pretends that this legal fact does not exist. Add to that a layer of secrecy and no transparency about the impacts on the 302B allocations for the rest of the bill. We know what it means: drastic cuts to American priorities like job creation and training, infrastructure improvement, safety net programs like Meals for Homebound Seniors, and much more. By failing to meet the basic standards of a functioning appropriations process, we, my friends, are flirting with disaster and continuing the very budgetary pressures defense leaders bemoan. Cuts stemming from the BCA, spending bills that aren't enacted on time, and unpredictable future spending levels. The House bill seeks to provide additional funds to address the first problem, but fails to amend the Budget Control Act. The Republican bills would trigger the sequester this committee so loathes, with 13% cuts to defense accounts. The Republican approach all but guarantees a short-term CR, if not a full-year CR, which makes problem number 2, late enactment of spending bills, even worse. And a massive one-year increase would create future funding cliffs and instability, contributing to problem number 3, unpredictability. I'm also concerned with specific provisions in this bill. There are 7 national defense restoration funds totaling $28.6 billion in what amounts to a slush fund for a department that would receive $28 billion more than it requested. This committee has a duty to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and transparently. We don't face a choice of whether to fund a strong military or not. Of course, we should fund the mightiest military on earth and the brave service members who sacrifice to protect us each day. The challenge which this committee is failing to meet is finding a balanced, bipartisan path to also fund critical domestic investments that sustain our economy, American safety, security, and well-being, and our ability to cultivate a ready military in a healthy, well-educated society. Just like every year, Democratic votes will be needed to enact appropriation law. I really do hope, my friends, we will soon start to work together to invest responsibly in both defense and non-defense priorities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no one, it's my pleasure to recognize the chair of the committee for, I believe, a manager's amendment.
Thank you. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
A manager's amendment offered by Mrs. Granger.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
So ordered.
The manager's amendment incorporates various non-controversial items in the bill and report, and these items have been cleared by both the majority and the minority. Of note, this includes language to enhance congressional oversight of the National Defense Restoration Fund. It requires the Secretary of Defense to submit an allocation plan to the Congress with detailed justifications and an explanation for how the funds will be used to support the new National Defense Strategy to be completed this year. I worked with my ranking member, Mr. Visklowski. Thank you for your suggestion, your concern about oversight. Thank you for putting together something we could both join in to increase that oversight, which is part of course, of our responsibility. It's a very useful addition to the bill, and I appreciate the effort.
Thank you, Ms. Granger. Mr. Visklowski is
I
recognized.
support the amendment and appreciate the gentlewoman's work.
Okay, thank you both. Then the question is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. No nays. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment is agreed to, and I'm pleased to recognize anyone else for an amendment. No more amendments. Mr. Cartwright, excuse me. Will the clerk read, please?
An amendment offered by Mr. Cartwright. At the end of the bill, insert the following. Section, none of the funds made available by this act may be used to plan for, begin, continue, complete, process, or approve a public-private competition under the Office of Management and Budget, Circular A76.
Waive the reading.
Consider it waived. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, I want to thank you and the committee staff for all your hard work on this bill. Ranking Member Visklowski, I want to thank you as well for your work and for your support of this amendment. I rise today to offer an amendment that would prohibit the Department of Defense from conducting new A76 studies. These studies rely on a process that both the GAO and the Inspector General of the Department of Defense concluded could not demonstrate any savings to the taxpayer. Subsequently, A76 studies have been subject to a congressional moratorium since the year 2010. My amendment would simply extend that moratorium. The primary flaw with the A76 process is the faulty underlying methodology to determine whether federal civilian jobs should be outsourced. It has not been updated since 2003. And the Inspector General's report noted that it simply fails to keep track of costs and savings. It is not supported by the facts. Incorporating an arbitrary 12% overhead factor cost for federal employees as opposed to contractors, the Inspector General concluded that, quote, multi-million-dollar decisions are based in part on a factor not supported by data. Unless DOD develops a supportable rate or an alternative method to calculate a fair and reasonable rate, the results of future competitions will be questionable, unquote. Making decisions based on such a faulty process is an irresponsible use of taxpayer dollars. This body owes a duty to our warfighters and the taxpayers. Going back to A76 studies is a breach of both. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment to maintain the moratorium on A76 studies, shielding our military readiness from a process in desperate need of drastic revision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reserve the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his comments. Ms. Granger.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment would weaken national security. Many defense items, such as intercontinental ballistic missiles, require routine maintenance and repair that are unique in nature and do not support a robust industrial base. Nevertheless, it's imperative that these missions are capably performed and not reliant on a single point of failure. It's appropriate that the Department of Defense have the flexibility necessary to manage these activities and to ensure that these capabilities are always available to the warfighter. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment.
Any further comments on the amendment? Ms. Lowy, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of Mr. Cartwright's amendment. The A76 outsourcing process threatens the longevity, expertise, and institutional knowledge of the civil service. As a result, the committee should not support outsourcing government jobs that federal employees can and already perform. We cannot risk the slippery slope of privatizing certain government functions without fully understanding the impacts both on federal expenditures and the quality of services offered by federal agencies. This is particularly important when it comes to our national security. Those working to keep us safe should focus on security, not their company's bottom line. I thank Mr. Cartwright for offering this amendment, and I urge its adoption.
Yes, did Mr. Visklowski, did you care to be recognized? Excuse me, Mr. Comer.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, thank you very much. I rise in support also of the gentleman's amendment. It does deal with federal employees. As constitutional officers, I think a mistake is made when constantly, year after year, decade after decade, federal employees are characterized as being slothful, stupid, lazy, inefficient, and wasteful of taxpayers' dollars. The fact is, how are we going to encourage any bright young person to think it would be a great career to be in federal employment? I just can't wait to get out of school and work for the federal government. I can't wait for that next CR, that next shutdown. I really think that we have to remember that when people receive Medicare benefits today, those are provided by federal employees. When retirees receive a Social Security check, those are provided by federal employees. We have a lot of civilian employees protecting this nation at the Department of Defense, obviously the concern of the gentleman who offered the amendment. We have public employees who protect us through their enforcement of our laws and keep us secure by protecting our borders. So we should always, every day, each of us, look for efficiencies in the delivery of government services. This circular is not the way to go, and I do support the gentleman's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Visklowski. Mr. Comer.
Thank you, Chairman. I also want to rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. I think the federal workforce is part of the solution to making the Department of Defense better. You can see that when you see a uniformed submariner thanking someone who works at a naval shipyard for making sure their submarine is safe. We shouldn't jeopardize our government's capability to develop skills and capacity that it needs to keep our ships afloat, to make sure our trucks are running, to make sure our airplanes are actually able to fly. You know, we've seen, as Mr. Visklowski said, years and years of tearing down the federal workforce. I think we need to rebuild it. And the way to do that is to maintain its workload. And therefore, I support the gentleman's amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. Any further discussion before I recognize Mr. Cartwright for 1 minute to close? Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Ranking Member Lowy, Ranking Member Visklowski, and Congressman Kilmer for your support. To conclude, A76 process uses faulty, antiquated methodology to determine whether federal civilian jobs should be outsourced, a matter we simply cannot approach in a haphazard manner. Both the GAO and the Inspector General of the Department of Defense concluded the process could not demonstrate any savings for the taxpayer. We must act sensibly with taxpayer dollars by basing our decisions on fact and not supposition or fiction. I urge the committee to vote yes on this amendment and ensure we fund the national defense in a responsible manner, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. The question then is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. It appears that the nays have it, the noes have it, and it's not agreed to. Okay, thank you. Any further amendments? Ms. Lee.
Before I get to my amendment, I want to associate myself with the remarks of our ranking member and just say that this pattern of denigrating women by the Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, sends really a despicable message to my 3 granddaughters, to all girls and all women, and really should be condemned. Let me offer my amendment now. This is quite a day. This is Lee Amendment number 1. It's straightforward.
Clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment offered by Ms. Lee. At the end of the bill, insert the following. Section, the authorization for use of military force.
To the spell of the reading.
Consider it done. The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would repeal the overly broad, this is the 2001 authorization to use military force after a period of 8 months after the enactment of this act, giving the administration and Congress sufficient time to decide what measures should replace it. This is not only timely, Mr. Chairman, it is really necessary. Now, on September 14, 2001, I did not vote for this authorization because I knew then that it would provide a blank check to wage war anywhere, anytime, for any length by any president. In the last 16 years, it has become increasingly clear that this AUMF has essentially provided the president, any president since then, all of our presidents, the authority to wage war in perpetuity. In fact, the Congressional Research Service has found that the 2001 AUMF has been used more than 37 times in 14 countries to justify military action and other activities, including warrantless surveillance and wiretapping, indefinite detention practices at Gitmo, targeted killing operations using lethal drones, and the open-ended expansion of military operations abroad. In addition to these activities, this AUMF has reportedly been invoked to deploy troops in Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Djibouti, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. Right now, we know that any president can unilaterally wage war under this outdated 2001 authorization. The last 2 presidents have bombed the Middle East and Africa, and President Trump, of course, is following down a similar path. The administration has authorized and launched airstrikes against Syria, sent more troops to fight ISIS, and now wants to send thousands of additional United States troops to Afghanistan. And I know that while we may not share a common position on replacement of the 2000 AUMF, many of us do agree that it's overly broad, and this authority is a major and concerning deterioration, really, of congressional oversight and war-making authority. And I think many of us can also agree that a robust debate and vote is necessary, long overdue, and must take place. Let me be clear. With the 2001 AUMF still on the book in its current form, any administration can rely on this blank check to wage endless war. So I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, for your comments. Ms. Granger.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment of the authorization for use of military force, called the AUMF, which this amendment attempts to repeal, is better known as the 9/11 AUMF, and is necessary for the Department of Defense to fight the global war on terrorism. U.S. military forces are conducting campaigns against al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda-affiliated forces worldwide using this authority. If agreed to, this amendment would kill the 9/11 AUMF on a specific date following the enactment of this act and applies to all such actions being carried out on or before that date. The amendment is a deal breaker and would tie the hands of the U.S. to act unilaterally or with partner nations with regard to al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorism. Let me be clear about what this amendment does. It cripples our ability to conduct counterterrorism operations against terrorists who pose a threat to the United States persons and interests. The amendment intends to put in place a major policy change that does not belong in this bill. In my judgment, the amendment dangerously and erroneously assumes that the terrorist threat from al-Qaeda and its affiliates has ended. The terrorist threat today is no less real and in many ways more daunting than it was when the Congress overwhelmingly gave the President the authority to protect us against those that want to do us harm. While some would argue that core al-Qaeda is weakened, as events in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria have shown, its affiliates and new terrorist groups continue to maintain strength. This amendment would effectively eliminate the President's ability to address that threat or other emerging threats from al-Qaeda affiliated or like-minded groups in North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and elsewhere. Therefore, I strongly urge rejection of this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Granger. Mr. Visklosky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of the gentlewoman's amendment. First of all, we are not determining policy under the amendment. We are suggesting 8 months after the enactment of this bill, policy should be determined. And there is nothing to prohibit this institution from beginning that debate on July 11th when we return from the holiday weekend. It does nothing until a new policy is put in place, so we in no way cripple or retard the ability of our military to deal with threats we face. The world has changed, and administrations have changed. We are now under the third administration, and we have switched parties since we had the original authorization. We are now in the 8th Congress with switching of control of political parties since that determination was made. We are asking members of the military to potentially give their lives for this nation. We should give them some of our time to meet our constitutional responsibility and to develop a current policy for their sacrifice.
Thank you, Mr. Visklosky. Anyone further comments? Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to rise and support my friend's amendment, and I couldn't agree more with the ranking member on the subcommittee's point of view on this. This is something where Congress has collectively avoided taking responsibility for years. The Constitution is awfully clear, as my friend points out, about where war-making authority resides. It resides in this body. And we've had leadership, honestly, on both sides that have put off this debate again and again and again. As a matter of fact, when the Secretary appeared before our subcommittee, I asked him, would it help you to have a new authorization? Let me make it very clear. I would support that authorization. I'm very much in favor of taking the war to ISIS. And he said, yes, it would. It's something that would help us a lot. So if we're going to send people to war, we owe them the support of the Congress of the United States, the visible support. And for those that have a different opinion, that is fair enough. That's what we're supposed to do, is debate these things. We're at war against an enemy that did not exist in a place that we did not expect to fight. So how AUMF that was passed, 16 years ago, before I was in Congress, could possibly be stretched to cover this is just beyond belief to me. So I thank my gentle friend with whom I often disagree, but always enjoy working with when we have the opportunity to do it, because I think she has raised an important point. I think she's done it repeatedly and effectively, and I think the Congress ought to listen to what she has to say, and we ought to debate this issue and provide the authority, I would hope, of the Congress of the United States for what we're doing, or if that's the wrong thing and the majority has a different point of view, that would be the appropriate thing. But it's not fair to ask men and women to fight and not have the full support of the Congress of the United States behind them. So with that, I yield back.
Mr. Cole, any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I'd like
Ryan.
to rise in support of the gentlelady's amendment here. Those of us who have, and associate myself with Mr. Cole's remarks, the fact that the men and women who serve us, when we travel and we go see them in the Persian Gulf and far-flung places around the world, they need to know that we have had the discussion, we've vetted all our interests, we've had the debate, and we're behind them, and we're behind what they're doing. So I want to thank the gentlelady, thank Mr. Cole for speaking up and support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Any further discussion? Mr. Stewart is recognized.
I would brief, thank you. I feel like my world is rocked because I see these two that have very different opinions, and yet I agree with you. And as a former military officer, I have on my father's wings. He served as a pilot in the Air Force in World War II. 5 of my 6 brothers served in the military. They have the courage to go out and fight these wars, and they notice that we don't have the courage to debate this and to give them the authority to go do this. And I know that from my friends who are in the military now. They notice that Congress doesn't have the guts to stand up and have this debate and give them the authority that they're continuing every day and putting their lives and their well-being and the sacrifice of their families. And for every soldier over there, there's someone back home who loves them, who is sacrificing just as well. They notice that Congress doesn't have the courage to have this debate. I support the intent of the amendment. I hope Congress will have the courage to do that. I've been saying that for several years now. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Stewart, any further discussion?
Sure.
The
Thank
gentleman.
you. Just very briefly, I just want to rise in
Taylor
support.
from Virginia.
I want to rise in support as well, too. I think that we've seen a disproportionate sacrifice with the military community who has gone over and over again. And I believe that we owe them the debate, whatever side you come on or come down on. I think that we do owe them a debate, because the American people should have a debate on this via the representatives to decide what we're going to do. So I just very briefly thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Ms. Lee, Mr. Rupersberger.
Came in this morning, I was going to vote no, but we're debating right now. And when two respected members of the military stand up and make a comment, I'm listening. Barbara Lee, you and I love you. I love the fact you are in a position to take a lot of positions that I don't take, but that's what we need. But I'm going to be with you on this, and your tenacity has come through. And I think right now that this is what's important for America, and that we need to move forward on this. So I'm going to vote yes.
Thank you. You're making converts all over the place, Ms. Lee.
This should be bipartisan, Mr. Chairman.
It is, and you have been incredibly insistent and persevered on this issue for a number of years. I think we recognize you, and obviously you have allies in the room, and we share your concern. Anyone else recognize Ms. Lee to close? If not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your remarks and those remarks of all of those who have spoken on behalf of this resolution. This should be bipartisan. This is about our country. This is about our troops. This is about Congress and our constitutional responsibility to do our job. And I remember, and many were here, many were not here, those horrific days after 9/11. This resolution came before the Congress 3 days, September 14th. It was overly broad. It was 60 words. And I think at this point, 16 years later, given the nature of the threats we face, that we should, in a bipartisan way, support my amendment. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. The question is on the Lee amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Oh, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Thank you, Ms. Lee. Further amendments. Any further amendments? Ms. McCollum. You did it, Judge. Yeah. Oops.
Good work, Barbara. Mr. Chair, I rise to offer an amendment to uphold our military's commitments to foreign-born.
Clerk will report.
An amendment offered by Ms. McCullum of Minnesota. At the end of the bill, insert the following. Section, except as provided by subsection B, none of the funds made available by this act may be used to implement the elimination of existing...
The amendment's considered read. The gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Ming and I offer this. During the height of the Iraq War, our military faced a shortage to personnel to fill critical roles in the medical profession and language experts in particular, and many of us who were serving at that time know just how desperate our military was feeling. To help fill these gaps, Defense Secretary Robert Gates authorized the military accession to Vital National Interests program in 2008. Now, this program sought out enlistees into the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. And they were foreign nationals who were legally present here in the United States, who had these essential skills that our military was looking for in medical and language skills. They had to pass extensive background tests. Medical recruits committed to serve 3 years of active duty service or 6 years in the reserve. And language and cultural recruits committed to 4 years of active duty. The recruits typically became naturalized citizens after completing this basic training. That was part of their roles in medical and language, etc. positions, and the military, without them, would not have been able to meet these critical roles. They wanted to serve a country that they had fallen in love with. Since 2009, more than 10,000 service members have participated in this program, and they fill critical roles in medical and language, etc. positions, and the military, without them, would not have been able to meet these critical roles. The Pentagon now is considering a plan to end the successful program and cancel enlistment contracts, signed contracts that are currently pending. This would devastate more than 4,000 foreign-born recruits. These people have been recruited who have actually signed enlistment contracts, but they have not received their basic training orders. For at least 1,000 of these individuals whose visas have expired because they thought they were going to be, serving in the military, it would leave them at risk for deportation through no fault of their own. No fault of their own. They had signed contracts with the U.S. military. So I strongly believe reneging on these contracts puts these recruits at risk, and it's a betrayal of the people who only wanted to serve the United States. This amendment would prevent the use of federal funds to eliminate enlistment contracts for the recruits in this program, except, and I want to be very clear, except in cases where the recruit has violated the laws of this land or the Uniform Military Code of Justice. We must ensure that the Department of Defense keeps its commitments to foreign-born recruits, and this amendment is a first step in holding the Pentagon accountable in doing that.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Ms. Granger?
This program, and it's used by the services to recruit and fill critical needs within the specialized skill sets. This amendment addresses an issue that was reported in the press earlier this week. We continue to perform our due diligence by gathering information from the department on exactly how they intend to address this backlog of recruits that are currently in this delayed entry program as described by Ms. McCollum. I pledge to work with the gentlewoman by gathering more information from the department and addressing this issue together as the bill moves forward, and I yield back.
So thank you, Ms. Ming, or Mr. Ropersberger was first. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, excuse me, you're a co-sponsor. Do you mind yielding to your colleague?
I will yield. Oh, you can yield.
Okay.
Okay.
It's always good to see up on your seat.
It's good to get up.
You're the Iron Man, so it takes a while to get up.
Well, if I can't do it, you can. I'm a poet and don't know it. I rise in support of Ms. McCollum's amendment. One of my constituents is affected by this issue. And, it's so important that when we have men and women who want to serve their country, that we stand behind them, and we always have as a country. This immigration issue is tearing our country apart. It's really a shame if you look back when the Senate passed their immigration bill that our leadership in the House wouldn't put it on the floor, but that's history. But when we're talking about men and women that have given up their right for the visas because they thought they were a part of a process and it's being taken away, they could be deported. So I stand behind this very strongly, and I would hope we can move forward in favor of these individuals. Remember, this program is a program that is a specialty program. So these people going into this program have a language skill or a skill that we need in our military.
Thank you, Ms. Ming. Pleasure to recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Congresswoman McCollum, for the thoughtful amendment before us today. I rise today in support of her amendment and in support of every individual in the MAVNI program who made a contract with the United States government that they would be willing to lay down their lives for our country in military service. They made a promise to our country, and we made a promise to them. We cannot now, month and in some cases years, after making these commitments, rescind our offers to men and women who have been building their lives around the commitment they made to our nation's armed services, and it's just not right. Personally, I have 8 cases in my own district that I'm currently trying to assist, and I'm sure there are more. I've written to President Trump to request simply that no person currently covered by the MAVNI program be deported due to the implementation of new policies being proposed by the Pentagon. If we want to have policy discussions about the termination of programs or the creation of new ones, that's fine, but I don't feel that it's fair to change the rules of the game for individuals who've built their lives around a promise that the U.S. government made to them. America's a nation that delivers on its promises, as is every person in this room. I'm not asking that the MAVNI program be extended or for additional money to be appropriated. I'm not even asking for special treatment, but I'm simply asking that those recruits who agreed to serve in our armed forces and who signed a contract to that effect be allowed to do so, And at the very least, should that not be possible, I ask that impacted individuals not be deported from the country they agreed to lay down their life for. Again, I thank Representative McCollum for her wonderful amendment. I support it and respectfully ask every person in this room to support it as well. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Wasserman Schultz is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the gentlelady's amendment, and just to underscore that this is a critical program that helps make sure that we can recruit and add to the nation's military people who have skills that we badly need, that we simply don't have available in the numbers that are necessary to help keep our country safe. Since the program started, as Ms. McCollum mentioned, more than 10,000 troops, most of them with service in the Army, have filled medical positions, language specialties that were identified by DoD as vital to the success of military operations. This isn't a quick way to get citizenship or an easy pathway to be admitted to the United States. These are critical needs that we have that are in short supply among U.S.-born troops. So under the Defense Department's plan, as outlined, these soldiers would not only watch their promise of citizenship crumble before their eyes, but even worse, be subject to deportation by the very country that they've been willing to risk their lives to protect. These recruits are on government rolls detailing their addresses, their phone numbers, their legal statuses, and that will make them prime targets of a Department of Homeland Security that is already overzealously in deporting people. Now think about that. To the very people who have risked their lives to protect us, this administration would be saying, thanks a lot, but you're on your own. This is a radical stance on immigration, and protecting our troops is directly at odds with the views of the vast majority of Americans. Breaking our promise of citizenship to immigrants who honorably served our nation is an affront to American values and a repudiation of the tenets of basic human decency and the antithesis of the ideals for which we stand. And moreover, nixing positions that are critical to operational success but are in short supply is irresponsible and dangerous. By all means, if there are individuals that need extra scrutiny, then scrutinize them. No one is suggesting that we shouldn't make sure that we keep our nation safe. But we aren't doing that if we deport people and cancel the contracts of people who are actually committed to helping keep our nation safer. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlewoman from Florida for her comments. Yield 2 minutes or as time as she may consume to Ms. Granger.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask if the gentlelady is going to remove her and her amendment, and I will work with you on this very important issue.
Happy to yield. Thank you, Ms. Granger. Happy to yield to
Thank you.
Ms. McCollum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, we owe it to these individuals to fix the problem. And as members of Congress, we have a responsibility when someone signs a contract to put their life on the line for this country that we honor that agreement. So I appreciate the chairwoman's bipartisan willingness to work on this. I look forward to working with my ranking member, Mr. Visklosky, and with Ms. Ming. And with that, I will withdraw the amendment and look forward to working with you till we come to the floor in the manager's amendment.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Any further amendments? Yes, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 2.
Clerk will read.
An amendment offered by Ms. Lee, page 9, line 6, increase the dollar amount.
Can the reading dispensed with? Ms. Lee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just call your attention to this headline in the Washington Post. Afghan military's uniform choice has unnecessarily cost U.S. taxpayers $28 million. Now, Mr. Chairman, this week, and I just want to put this in context, Congressman Burgess, Congressman Lance, Congressman Jones, Grover Norquist, all of us had a press conference this week. We've been working together over the last few years on legislation to audit the Pentagon. This is just one small example as to why this amendment is extremely important. It's straightforward. It addresses the unnecessary and questionable uniform choice by the Afghan military that cost taxpayers $28 million, and this is according to the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan. His report was released last week. Specifically, this amendment would cut $28 million from Afghan Security Force Funds account and transfer it to the Defense Suicide Prevention Office, which helps coordinate our suicide prevention efforts within DoD. This amendment is incredibly timely, and it's necessary to get at waste, fraud, and abuse, which really continues to plague the Pentagon. While over $117 billion has been appropriated to Afghanistan relief and reconstruction since 2002, massive amounts have been wasted, massive amounts. That's why we must rely on the report of the SIGAR to expose corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse in funds on this mission. As I mentioned before, the report included the United States Department of Defense wasted $28 million on, and they called it proprietary forest camouflage uniforms for the Afghan National Army. Now, just 2% of Afghanistan is forested. It's 2.1% actually. This report found that uniforms were both inappropriate for Afghanistan and were chosen over other options that would have been far less costly to the taxpayer. This is not a small amount of money, my colleagues, and this wasteful error could have been prevented. It's egregious, it's wasteful spending, and that's why it's so critical that we have oversight on this spending, not just over troop uniforms, but always. We know that our inspector generals do invaluable work exposing waste, fraud, and abuse that's happening in Afghanistan and across the Pentagon, and we should follow the expert guidance by finally, of course, auditing the Pentagon. But for today, we should at least transfer the funds, $28 million, and give it to the Defense Suicide Prevention Office, which provides advocacy and policy to help reduce suicidal behaviors in service members, civilians, and their families. I ask for an aye vote.
Ms. Lee, the cigar you refer to is not Mr. Cole's cigar.
No.
That's Special Inspector General for.
That's right.
That takes a look on these.
Cole.
So just wanted to see whether people were on their toes or not. Ms. Granger.
Thank you. I respectfully rise in opposition to the amendment. This amendment would cut current war funding due to a procurement error that happened 7 years ago and was recently in the news because of an Inspector General report. In February 2010, the Department of Defense, on behalf of the Afghanistan Army, did procure uniforms in a forest-colored pattern. Despite the fact that Afghanistan is sparsely forested, the cost of the uniforms was $28 million. But the amendment cuts $28 million from current funding to support the Afghanistan Army, Air Force, and National Police forces, undermining the resources needed to ensure that Afghanistan can shoulder more responsibility of its own security and reduce the burden on American and allied troops. The amendment further proposes to realign the funds towards suicide prevention programs. Make no mistake, the committee is greatly concerned about suicides in the military. The Department of Defense significantly increased its commitment to suicide prevention programs by adding $30 million to the fiscal year 2018 budget request for a total of $83 million. As a result of this increase, it's not necessary for the committee to provide additional funding as it has in the past. Concern for well-being of our troops has been a bipartisan concern, always will be, will remain so. We must not allow this gravely serious issue to become a subject of political one-upsmanship. Therefore, I strongly urge rejection of this amendment.
I thank the gentlewoman for comments. Mr. Visclosky is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the gentlewoman's amendment. I would point out that I am hopeful that by the end of this fiscal year, the Department of Defense will be able to have full agency-wide fiscal statement audits. They are not there yet. And given the fact that we are going to give the department under this legislation $60 billion more than they have today, I'm assuming they can compensate for this $27 million, which will remain in the DoD budget for a very worthwhile purpose, and that is suicide prevention. From time to time, if errors occur, I think the department has to be told by appropriators that they should exercise care Otherwise, there will be a price to pay, and I appreciate the gentlewoman's amendment, and I do support it.
Thank you, Ms. Any further? Thank you, Ms. Vlasky. Any further comments? Ms. Lee's recognized to close for a minute.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure that we're clear with regard to the Defense Suicide Prevention Office. This office continues to be severely underfunded. And when we see, and we do see the rise in suicidal behaviors in service members, civilians and their families, we do need an increased funding stream. And $28 million would, even with the increases, just barely scratch the surface. Our young men and women risk their lives. They sacrifice for our country. They deserve to fully fund this office. And the Afghan security forces who wasted this $28 million. And we're not taking this from any accounts that would provide for any training or any U.S.-based operations. This is specifically money for that these uniforms have been wasted on, and we want to make sure that we find a way to send the message to the Afghan security forces that we're not going to let that happen again in Afghanistan. So I ask for an aye vote.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. The question is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Noes, opinion of the chair, the noes have the majority. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments? Ms. Capter or Ms. Lowy or Ms. Capter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes, Ms. Capter.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I stand for a couple reasons. First, to associate myself with the remarks of other colleagues who've spoken about the President's really cruel remarks. I just want to point out that the individual to whom he directed his criticism lost her father within the last few weeks. I just think it was terribly unpresidential and unbecoming of any leader of this country. I feel compelled also to say that this bill is $658 billion, and we are considering it without a full national budget before us. Under the Budget Control Act of 2011, we should only be spending $549 billion. So this is not only, the bill we're considering is not only $28.4 billion above what the President requested, but it's $109 billion above what the Budget Control Act, whatever you think of the Budget Control Act, requires. And what this means is that every other subcommittee chair that isn't first in the lineup is going to have to shortchange the American people in some way, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's education, whether it's the health care of the American people, whatever issue you want to pick. What we are doing today is very unfair, and I just want to say there used to be a time when we operated by regular order, and bills would come to the floor in regular order, and we could amend. What's going to happen to this bill and a lot of others, there's going to be a couple fellows sitting in a room somewhere at the end of the fall who are going to make decisions for the American people, and most of us won't be involved in that. This is not the way to govern. This is not in the best interest of the country, particularly at this time. This is an enormous bill, and no other subcommittee chair should be faced with having to cut, despite the important work that is being done in this committee. And too much power is moved to the top in this institution, and it isn't good government. Our subcommittee should function under regular order. This committee should function under regular order. So I wanted to say that. Secondly, I wish to say to the chair and the ranking member, thank you very, very much for the inclusion in this bill of very important funding for the European Reassurance Initiative. We've now seen modern-day tyranny through hybrid warfare, particularly in the face of Russia. And this bill contains extraordinarily important funding to meet that challenge. The Ukraine Security Assistance Initiatives are included herein. I do wish to state, as we move to the floor, I'm considering amending. Perhaps we can find a way to do this simply. For the U.S. European Command's Defense Security Cooperation Agency, which is reduced in this bill, I'm very concerned about what that might mean for some of the efforts that we need to conduct on the European continent, and also for additional attention to the state partnership program beyond the additional assistance that has been provided, specifically directed at places that are enduring great conflict right now. I did wish to say that it's encouraging to see the sanctions prohibiting the Department of Defense from engaging in business with the Russian defense company Rosoboron Export, which exports arms to our neighbor Mexico. However, it is disturbing that the Secretary of Defense, under the language, may waive that limitation upon certain criteria being met, but only informing Congress, not requiring our approval. I find this questionable, and I'm hoping that we can fix this before we move to the floor. I might also add, parenthetically, that the Russia sanctions bill that the Senate passed with only 2 dissenting votes has been sitting over in another committee in this House and not moved. There's something wrong down there. And whatever is capping that effort is hurting our efforts globally to defend liberty at its most tender points. I thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Captor. Mr. Rogers, I understand you want to move to strike the last word.
Move to strike the last word,
The
Mr.
gentleman's
Chairman.
recognized for 5 minutes.
For the purpose of a colloquy with the chair lady, if she would agree, to talk about, briefly, an issue that this committee discovered years ago about the most egregious shortcoming in our defense and veterans benefits program, and that's the inability of the veterans hospitals to get information from the DOD on a soldier who was injured while on active duty and now seeking treatment in a VA hospital. Some of you heard me say this, and I'll repeat it for those who haven't, briefly. A few years ago, a young soldier was brought to my office here from my district who had been severely injured in Afghanistan. He had lost completely the sight of one eye. He was brought to the hospital in Germany, was operated on. They were able to save the other eye mostly. But now he's out of service for a couple of years, and this bad eye, the one that was injured, began to deteriorate. And so he goes to the Lexington VA hospital for them to try to fix the problem. VA hospital could not get records from DOD about what the operators had done on him in Germany while on active duty. The systems just don't communicate with each other. And he lost his eye, the other eye. A sad, sad story that's been repeated time and again. This committee, Mr. Chairman, discovered the problem, or brought the problem to light, and has been hammering on it now for several years. I'm sad to say it's not yet solved, and we've poured millions into it, both VA budget and DOD, each one of them wanting to protect their system, which is egregious, bureaucratic, bungling, that's meaningful to soldiers. So, again, I gather, Madam Chairwoman, that you've addressed this problem again in your bill. Would you tell us what's in the bill in that regard?
Yield to Ms. Granger.
I yield.
Thank you. Yeah, earlier this year, the Defense Department launched a state-of-the-art electronic health record system at a pilot site. And the feedback we're getting from the board has been very positive. This bill does fully fund that request to expand the program to additional sites. And I appreciate you raising the issue and for your leadership and Mrs. Lowy's leadership on this effort. I will look into it personally, and I look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
I thank the gentlewoman.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me associate myself with those remarks, and hats off to Ms. Lowy and former Chairman Rogers, who we had a number of years ago what I call a come to Jesus session with Secretary Shinseki and Secretary of Defense Hagel, and not enough progress has been made. It's inexcusable that we're at this point, and I'm so pleased that our former chairman has highlighted that, and that both Mr. Visklosky and Ms. Granger are addressing it. It's a better scene on the Department of Defense side than it is on the VA side. I know Mr. Dent is working on it. I'm not looking for additional talkers, but let me give you a pat on the back. Oh, uh-oh. Okay. You want me to yield to time, then a brief comment by Mr. Dent, then we're going to move along because we're getting near the end of this bill.
This is a brief comment. The young soldier that came to the office, he's from my district, and we got around to talking about moonshine.
Your time's up.
And I said, would you like a little taste of moonshine? He says, well, I can tell you one thing. It won't make me blind. It's true.
Really quick.
Two fingers, Mr. Dent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dent, then we're going to wrap it up.
Real quick. Just a couple weeks ago, the VA Secretary Dave Shulkin announced that he was going to adopt the DoD software. They're negotiating with the contractor, Cermer, on this. So they're taking aggressive action at the VA, more or less to adopt the DoD commercial technology. So we're moving in a better direction. There's a lot of work involved. It's going to require some additional funding, obviously, but there'll be more said on this issue in the not-too-distant future.
Thank you, Mr. Dent. Yield a minute to Ms. Granger for additional comment. Then we, I believe, have one more amendment.
Right, just one thing to add. In this bill, it's $740 million for that, which money doesn't do everything. Oversight does, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Granger. Further amendments, Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
An amendment.
To waive the
Consider it done. The time is yours, Ms. Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would require us to consider a full slate of 302B allocations prior to reporting bills out of committee. It is outrageous that not only are we not considering a full slate of allocations, but that the majority isn't even bothering to approve interim allocations for the bills we consider today. This is a break from our long-standing practice. It is a gross departure from regular order. Republicans frequently talk about constantly ignoring this in their actions. It is unacceptable that instead of providing a public list of allocations for each subcommittee so we can evaluate each bill, both on its merits as well as how it fits into the broader appropriations process, Republicans have worked in secret to develop allocations, but refuse to release them. So I asked my friends on the other side of the aisle, why are you not being transparent with your plans for all of the spending bills? Today, we're considering the second and third bill of the year in full committee. We will have marked up 4 others in subcommittee. The vast majority of discretionary funds has been allotted, yet you still refuse to provide a complete picture of the remaining bills. We can only assume the majority plans to drastically cut vital priorities such as education, transportation infrastructure, medical research, and job training programs. The details may be a secret now, but soon enough, the jig will be up, and you'll have to show the American people the damage you'll do to their priorities. This committee has had a long history of working in a bipartisan fashion to produce a full slate of bills. We may not agree, but each side can make thoughtful statements on their priorities. So I'm greatly alarmed with the Republican lack of transparency, which unfortunately resembles the manner Republicans have used to kill Obamacare. Show the American people your budget. Let's have a real debate on priorities for this country, and let's do so in the light of day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. I rise to oppose amendment. As the gentlewoman stated, her amendment would amend the Congressional Budget Act to require 302B allocations to be adopted by our committee before reporting our bills. I wish we could amend the Congressional Budget Act. I wish we could repeal it, lock, stock, and barrel, and do it right now. But unfortunately, as the gentlewoman knows, I think most of the people in this room and certainly on the committee, it's not within this committee's jurisdiction to do it. And if we had to wait for the 302As from the Budget Committee in order to write a set of 302Bs, we'd be stuck in neutral right now unable to move forward. And we need to get our work done, so that's why we're proceeding under these circumstances. We anticipated having a final top-line funding number for both defense and non-defense from the Budget Committee this week, so we could devise a full slate of 302Bs. As it turns out, we've all read about it, the Budget Committee needs a little more time to get us the numbers we need. But as we all know, we're already months behind in the process of moving our appropriations bills forward through no fault of this committee's. It would be a mistake to tie this defense bill and all the things in here that meet the needs of our military and our Intelligence Committee because of this situation. So I rise to oppose the bill and ask members to do so as well. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you for yielding, Mr. Chairman. As former ranking member of the Milcon VA Subcommittee and a former member of the Defense Subcommittee, I'm extremely proud that we've come together in a bipartisan fashion to meet the needs of our nation's defense. I congratulate Chairman Granger and Ranking Member Visclosky for crafting a very, very thorough defense bill. This bill provides the necessary resources to ensure that our military remains capable and ready to defend and secure our national interests. It increases our end strength. It modernizes our equipment. It provides for a top-notch health system for our service members and their families. As a cancer survivor, I'm particularly pleased that this bill fully funds DoD's cancer research. This includes $90 million for prostate and $120 million for breast cancer research. These programs fund high-impact, innovative research, which is peer-reviewed by cancer advocates and researchers alike, and will go a long way in knowing how to treat and eventually prevent cancer. With that said, Mr. Chairman, I do have some concerns, some serious concerns about the process we're following, and as a consequence, I rise in support of Ranking Member Lowy's amendment to the Congressional Budget Act to not allow consideration of any general appropriations bill unless the committee has first agreed by majority vote on allocations for each subcommittee for the fiscal year of the bills. Mr. Chairman, I must point out, as has been said, that although it's the end of June, we still have no budget resolution, no top-line spending number, the debt limit is rapidly approaching, and we have no full list of subcommittee allocations. Marking up just one bill at a time without a full list of allocations leaves us effectively working in the dark. Further, without a bipartisan budget deal, we will also be forced to cope with potential return of sequestration, as the chairman referenced earlier in the meeting. This strategy results in an inequitable distribution of funds between the defense and the non-defense related accounts. While our defense-related programs are vital to the nation, our non-defense accounts are equally important for our national security. If history proves correct, we are again in danger of having a broken appropriations process. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that it would be unconscionable for any of us to help pass spending bills that shift burdens onto working families and the most vulnerable among us. Agreeing to subcommittee allocations bill by bill puts us in great danger of doing just that. As we get ready to go home for the July recess to spend time in our communities and with loved ones, we should keep in mind that the cookouts and the gatherings we will partake in are due to the concerted efforts resulting from fully resourced defense and non-defense programs. Working together keeps us safe, and the only way to do that is to ensure that these programs, all of the programs, are funded appropriately. So I urge my colleagues to vote for the Lowy amendment. You should know deep down inside that it's the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Lauro, recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman. Thank you. I rise in support of the Lowy amendment and also want to express my disappointment, as my colleagues have, that we are considering bills without allocations. We should not be marking up any bill in this committee until we have a complete picture of the overall spending plans. That is the regular order. That's what this committee says that it is structured on. That will give every member of the committee, Republican, Democrat alike, the ability to answer important questions. Questions like, will we be robbing some important programs to provide increases in others? Will be spending overall above the amounts that we spent last year? Yet today, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, we have no interim 302B allocations. We may see that the plan the chairman has in his head right now would shortchange other bills, but today, no member of this committee can answer this question. You know, we all listen to the word on the street of people that we come into contact with in this institution. Well, word on the street is that the Labor H bill is going to be cut by $5 billion. Why are we hearing this secondhand? Why aren't we hearing anything in this chamber about what the cuts to Labor H or any other subcommittee's bill will be? What priorities will we neglect to make these kinds of draconian cuts? Are we going to look at children's education? How about mental health services, the NIH, job training? All of these would likely be cut if Labor H is in fact funded $5 billion below today. We do not know what kinds of constraints, we hope none, will be placed on our subcommittees regarding offsets and chimps. And moreover, the bill before us today exceeds the $549 billion cap for discretionary defense spending by $35 billion. This would trigger a sequester, would it not? And if that answer is yes, it would trigger the president to make across-the-board cuts to defense programs. I would like to point out that some of my Republican colleagues on this committee have voiced concerns about spending levels. Yet, defense is well above the cap, and we currently have no idea what the plan is for non-defense priorities. I would expect that no member of this committee should vote without knowing the full plan. So I urge the committee to vote for a transparent, a legitimate full set of allocations. I urge the chairman to put his plan out there for all of us to see. We know that keeping things a secret does not do any good for anyone. This process is a charade. These numbers are meaningless with all of the cards being on the table for all of us to see. I urge the majority, show us the plan for labor, for health, for education, and for all of the other subcommittees. Thank you, and yield back my time.
Mr. Lauro, Mr. Price seeks his own time. You're recognized, Mr. Price.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of Ms. Lowy's amendment and want to stress, as she did, that we're custodians in this committee of the power of the purse, the key constitutional power of our institution. The power of the purse is embodied in the appropriations process. And that process works best if it's exercised as an institutional power, not a partisan power, an institutional power, no matter who the president is, no matter what the division of party control is, a cooperative institutional exercise of the power of the purse. You know, and that power, as we all know, has always been in danger from time to time of being swamped. Swamped by partisan forces, swamped by ideological forces. But I think we all know it's been taken to a new level. It's been institutionalized, that danger, by the Budget Control Act, by sequestration embodied in the Budget Control Act. And if the Trump administration has its way, this will get even worse. Appropriating or trying to appropriate at the BCA levels not only makes bipartisanship impossible, it may well make appropriating impossible. How are we going to write workable bills at this level? We simply can't do it. We've proved that year after year. But in the meantime, the majority leadership of this committee is proceeding one bill at a time, one allocation at a time, without knowledge of what the other allocations will look like, or even this time what the aggregate number is going to be. That, I'd suggest, is a formula for dysfunction, for further deterioration and discrediting
of the process of which we are the custodians. Now we'll once again, as we know, face a reckoning on September 30th. And we may enact a budget patch again at that point. That lets us pass maybe a CR or two, and then finally an omnibus appropriations bill. We have seen that movie before. But it's a high-wire act. It's especially risky under present circumstances. It's destabilizing at best. It's no way to govern a great country. For once, why don't we get ahead of the curve? Why don't we make, right now, a BCA adjustment in advance that lets us do our work in an orderly and responsible way, knowing what our allocations, all of our allocations, are going to be in advance, cooperatively writing our bills to those specifications. That's the idea underlying Ms. Lowy's amendment, and I urge its support.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. Ms. Roybal-Allard, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also rise in support of the Lowy amendment. And I will be brief because I think my other colleagues have already made the strong arguments for this amendment. Now, I understand the chairman is facing intense pressure to get our bills through the committee, and that passing our bills through committee is critical to the appropriations process. But bills that we consider without knowing about the big picture is fundamentally flawed. How can our work be coherent when the Budget Committee is unable to function, is unable to give us a 302A allocation? I'm afraid that this is a recipe for failure. It is a slow train wreck that I think that we can all see coming, regardless of what side of the aisle we sit in. And it is a huge investment in time and energy on bills that will almost certainly have to be fundamentally reworked once a top-line funding level comes into focus. So I urge my colleagues to please support the Lowy amendment.
Thanks, the gentlewoman, for her comments. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of the Lowy amendment, and I want to also agree with the words of the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee. It is most unfortunate that you find yourself, Mr. Chairman, in this position because the Budget Committee has not done its job. But irregardless, it's important that this committee be given a complete list of the 302B allocations in which to debate and vote. Without it, we're forced to consider bills without any idea how they fit into the bigger picture. You've heard the examples, and the one that I'm going to use as a ranking member of the Interior Appropriations and other related agencies is what is going to be the funding for our tribal brothers and sisters? What is going to be the level of making sure that we keep our air and our water clean? We should be a transparent and open process, and yet we're operating in the dark. I know I feel I'm operating in the dark when I have constituents and people who are concerned about the appropriations in my preview come up and say, well, what's the funding going to be? How many employees are there going to be? Are we going to see our brownfields cleaned up? They all want to have answers. And I can't even give them a top line number for what could be happening in the subcommittee that I'm the ranking member on. So we're in the dark. We deserve to have an open process. And I want to be sure that folks here know I really do appreciate the relationships that I have built across the aisle, the friendships, and the work that I do with my chairman. But when you take away the committees and the subcommittee's ability to debate and vote on allocations and have a full discussion, we're taking away our ability to make sure that we advance bills that keep our country, our communities, and our families safe and strong. And it, you know, people have talked about CRs and that. Well, you're right. We're right now in the Smithsonian Mall. We're celebrating the circus. And to use Mr. Price's comment about a high-wired act, that's what's going on here right now. And we don't know who's going to fall off. So we have a responsibility to make sure that we work together. And recent history clearly points out at the end of the day, it's Republicans and Democrats working together that get these bills to the floor and get them voted on. But we need to do it in a transparent way. All 12 subcommittees deserve to know their allocations now. I yield back to my
Thank you,
colleagues,
Ms.
and I
McCollum.
support.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Passing a full slate of 302Bs is a basic function of the appropriations process. And it's something that we should have done before we marked up the Milcon BA bill just a week or so ago. I mean, let's be real here. We already know that you know what each subcommittee's allocation is. And it is mind-boggling that there would be an attempt to conceal that information. That is certainly outside the culture of what I have known this committee to be. It is in the spirit of cooperation, as we've seen today with the adoption in a bipartisan way, after many years of trying, Ms. Lee's amendment. This is the committee that is above partisan politics. It's one of the reasons that I have enjoyed for 10 years serving on this committee. And it's also essential that each of us knows the decisions that we're making, not bill by bill, but in totality. And so for me, because the president, as I mentioned the last time we debated this, because the president's budget is the only thing we really have to get any sense of the direction of how these programs are going to be funded, cuts dramatically the budget of NOAA just as hurricane season has started. You know, I have the responsibility as a representative of a district that is right in the midst of Hurricane Alley to be making a decision about allocations, not one at a time, but based on the resources that have been budgeted for defense, for Ledge Branch, for Milcon BA, and for Interior and Energy and Water, and all the way through the 12 bills. But we're denied the ability to do that, and we are, as a result, making decisions irresponsibly. Mr. Chairman, in addition to the obvious issues that are presented by appropriating in a vacuum, if you continue to just use the BCA allocation for FY 2018, it's essentially going to have the same impact, as I mentioned the last time I debated this, as the Trump budget. Our committee cannot function at the budget cap levels, nor can we operate under President Trump's budget numbers. Under both of these scenarios, we are setting ourselves up for complete failure. Mr. Chairman, we know you had to think about the other allocations when deciding on the allocation for the Milcon VA and defense bills, and in order to budget responsibly, we are going to continue to demand that you release all of the 302B allocations so we can make decisions in totality rather than in a vacuum. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just close by underscoring that the culture of this committee has always been that we advocate publicly and privately for regular order, which we desperately need. And I feel quite certain that our friends on the other side of the aisle, if the shoe were on the other foot, would be standing in my place arguing the exact same thing and would find this process unacceptable. So I urge the adoption of the gentlelady's amendment, and I yield back the balance.
Thank the gentleman from Florida. Mr. Serrano, I believe, would like some time.
Yes, I am Serrano.
You are more than Serrano.
Well, you said I believe. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I hope people understand my statement because half of it is self-serving on our behalf. I have always seen my role on this committee in two ways. One, to keep our government running, to pay for the bills, if you will, and then to use this seat of mine to see how we can get more help for those who don't have a voice in society and for the territories, and of course for my home district. That's what we do. But I've also seen another role for myself, and that is that I'm so proud to be on this committee that I try every so often to continue to tell people that in spite of what they hear or what they may see, we continue to be the powerful Appropriations Committee. And I think when we do what we're doing now, we take away from ourselves. Because people look at us and say, what are they doing? They don't even allocate monies for what they're doing. I have a wonderful relationship with Mr. Cullerson. We don't agree on the bill that we're putting together. I shouldn't tell you that ahead of time. but he is just a fair human being. And he's got a number that was given to him for a bill. As ranking member, I have to ask, is that the real number? Will that number change? And if it changes, will it go up? Will it go down? And what will it mean to all the programs that we care about, the Legal Services Corporation, the NASA educational programs, the climate change programs, if you will. And so I think that we have to very carefully begin to do two things. Bring back regular order all the way through. And that means starting with us. If the Budget Committee doesn't give us a number, then there's got to be a way to confront them to say we need a number. We need to function with a real number. We can't just make it along, as we go along. And secondly, to keep reminding ourselves that we're appropriators, to the point where for a while, I don't hear it much as I used to, but the chairman of every subcommittee was not called a chairman, but a cardinal. That was the power of the committee. And so I just want to make sure that we realize that what we're doing here is wrong. We can't just allocate piecemeal. We can't do bill by bill. We have to do a whole picture and then fully understand what we're doing and take care of our needs and our responsibilities. And right now, I don't think our leadership at certain levels is allowing us to have our responsibilities. But I do say that I respect the fact that the chairman is faced with a very difficult situation in his first year as chairman.
Well, let's not excite Mr. Culbertson to get up to speak.
No. I'm talking about you as a chairman.
Okay.
The bromance.
But I tell you what I used to tell Chairman Rogers. Push, push, push. You have more power than you think you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serrano. Mr. Rupert, batting cleanup, I hope.
Okay, yes. I'll hit a
Thank you very much. Brevity.
Okay, well, I'll very quickly say I support Ms. Lowy's bill for stability.
Very much, Mr. Rubersberger.
Sure. No. But I would like to use my time for two issues. Mr. Chairman, you raised the issue of the sequestration. Those of us on defense appropriations know that every four-star admiral and general who've come before us have said that makes our military weaker. That's the number one issue. And we talk about it over and over. I can tell you this as a member of the Appropriations Committee. I respect both sides of the aisle and the leadership in both sides of the aisle. But we talk about it and talk about it. We have to do something about it. If we don't do something about it, we're making us weaker. If there's ever a chance and a reason to violate the Hastert rule, it's on sequestration. Because if the Speaker would allow us to do what's right for USA and our military, we can move forward and deal with this issue of sequestration. We are in the most dangerous times that we have ever been. Now, the other issue that I want to raise is the issue of cyber security. I represent NSA, and we do a lot with respect to what's going on there. NSA probably does more to protect our military and our country than any other entity. But I'm really worried, and the chairman of the Homeland Security, my friend, knows that we are in a bad way as far as the resources in Homeland Security with all the attacks, the Russian attacks, the things that are happening on a regular basis. Right now, my research has shown that our Homeland Security budget, as it relates to cybersecurity, is about 2%. And there's the way the system works, money comes from defense to cybersecurity. Now, we're not going to fix it with this budget, but I'm asking for the leadership, Democrat and Republican, to work with me, to work with our chairman and Des Millard on Homeland Security in the future to deal with this issue of cybersecurity. We need to make this a high priority, and we can get more into that when we do the markup on the Homeland Security bill. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rivers. Mr. Ryan is recognized.
I'm going to be very brief, but I want to make the one point that I think has underlined a lot of the arguments that just happened. By not setting this allocation, obviously rising in support of the amendment, by not setting this allocation, we are somehow saying that this bill, the defense bill, is somehow more important than some of the other bills. And I think we can all make the argument, and we all believe that we have to support our troops and support the work they're doing and give consistency so that we can be a strong country. But if we're not a strong country economically, then we're not going to build the kind of economy that we need, that's going to generate the kind of revenues that we need, that will allow us ultimately to fund the military so that we can have a strong one. So while many of us support what's happening with the defense bill, we've got to take this in a comprehensive way so that we can make the investments in defense, but also make the investments that will keep the economy strong.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Mr. Ryan. Ms. Lee, you're recognized, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Lowy for her closing remarks on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I rise in support of our ranking member's amendment, which requires top lines for each subcommittee. Now, Mr. Chairman, I serve on the Budget Committee, and we have yet to be noticed when we will meet. Yes, we are stuck in neutral, but that should not require us to be irresponsible. By busting caps in this bill, I have to assume that in future bills, we will know that this process really has been impractical and really reckless. It'll lead to instability that we really cannot afford. This type of piecemeal approach is unacceptable, and yes, again, it's irresponsible. We're hurting the American people without a budget and without an agreed-upon spending level. It's really a shame that we have once again kicked the can down the road in spite of what the Budget Committee is doing. And this approach has become all too familiar with my colleagues. If we did not set priorities in our personal and our household budget, we'd all be bankrupt. What a terrible example that we're setting, and we should really know better. Let me be clear. Now, if we do not address the top line numbers immediately, our other very important bills, including labor, HHS, and SFOPs, which I sit on, will bear the brunt of these reckless decisions. I know that seniors also are very anxious about our proposal. Cuts in Meals on Wheels from the Trump budget and not having a congressional budget do not reassure them nor reduce their fear of losing their meals. Not having a budget really is a disservice to our constituents and the country. So it's my hope that we will address the budget before we see another bill in this committee. So I urge a yes vote on the Lowy amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Ms. Lowy is recognized to close on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with great respect for my friends on both sides of the aisle, the Republican lack of transparency is unacceptable. The committee cannot operate effectively in secret. It really is time to consider a full slate of allocations and write realistic spending bills. So I ask you, vote yes on this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. The question is on the Lowy amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Nay. No.
Ask for a recorded
A recorded vote is all those in favor of recorded votes, raise your hand. And sufficient number. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, no. Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mr. Amadei. Mr. Amadei, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, yes. Mr. Calvert. No. Mr. Calvert, no. Mr. Carter. No. Mr. Carter, no. Mr. Cartwright. Aye. Mr. Cartwright, aye. Ms. Clark. Aye. Ms. Clark, aye. Mr. Cole. No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Cuellar. Aye. Mr. Cuellar, aye. Mr. Culberson. No. Mr. Culberson, no. Ms. DeLauro. Aye. Ms. DeLauro, aye. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent, no. Mr. Diaz-Balart. No. Mr. Diaz-Balart, no. Mr. Fleischman. No. Mr. Fleischman, no. Mr. Fortenberry. No. Mr. Fortenberry, no. Mr. Frelinghuysen. No. Mr. Frelinghuysen, no. Miss Granger. No. Miss Granger, no. Mr. Graves. Mr. Graves, no. Dr. Harris. No. Dr. Harris, no. Miss Herrera Butler. Miss Herrera Butler, no. Mr. Jenkins. No. Mr. Jenkins, no. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce, no. Miss Captor. Aye. Miss Captor, aye. Mr. Kilmer. Aye. Mr. Kilmer, aye. Miss Lee. Aye. Miss Lee, aye. Mrs. Lowy.
Aye.
Mrs. Lowy, aye. Miss McCollum. Aye. Ms. McCollum, aye. Ms. Meng. Ms. Meng, aye. Mr. Molinar. Mr. Molinar, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Palazzo. Mr. Palazzo, no. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Pocan. Mr. Pocan, aye. Mr. Price. Mr. Price, aye. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Quigley, aye. Mrs. Roby. Mrs. Roby, no. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rooney. Mr. Rooney, no. Miss Roybal Allard. Miss Roybal Allard, aye. Mr. Ruppersberger. Mr. Ruppersberger, yes. Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, aye. Mr. Serrano. Mr. Serrano, aye. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, no. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, no. Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, no. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo, no. Mr. Visklosky. Mr. Visklosky, aye. Miss Wasserman Schultz. Miss Wasserman Schultz, aye. Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Yoder. Mr. Yoder, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, nay.
Are there any members who wish to record their votes or change their votes? Seeing none, the clerk will tally. On this vote, the ayes are 22, the nays are 30. The amendment is not agreed to, and we have a vote on passage. I yield to Mr. Rogers for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to favorably report the Defense Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2018 to the House.
Thank you. 3 days considered, as we always do. Thank you. So now we have the question is on the passage, the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. The motion's agreed to. The 3 days. Don't go anywhere. We have the Ledge Branch bill. We'll move pretty quickly through that with your cooperation. Thank you all for your work on this bill. Don't depart. We still have to do Ledge Branch.
Okay, Tim
Now for the
Ryan.
important bill.
Now, it is. It's keeping us safe and secure.
Are you going to binders?
Whoa.
10 minutes break. Right away, good. Pete was just keeping them warm.
That's right. Warm it up.
And now I'm checking my pocket.
Youngstown guy had like. So he starts right off. What's that?
Yes, dear.
Can you wait 1 second?
Let's turn that mic off.
Oh, turn it off. Press it.
If everybody could take their seats or at least be quiet so we could proceed. If people are departing, please depart. We're going to do the Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill. May I say on behalf of the committee, we want to thank Chairman Granger, Ranking Member Visklosky, and the Defense Subcommittee for their good work on the bill. We will now turn our attention to, with your cooperation please, to our second item on the agenda for today, the fiscal year 2018 Legislative Branch Appropriations Bills. I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Yoder to present his first bill as Subcommittee Chairman. Will the committee come to order? Would you give your attention to Mr. Yoder? Ladies and gentlemen, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Yoder is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the committee for its warm-up work on the Defense Appropriations Bill. And now we get to the main event today, the legislative branch. So thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank my subcommittee for their diligent work.
Committee will be in order. Mr. Ryan's right. Mr. Yoder, you're recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I want to thank my subcommittee members for their diligent work. Over the past few months, we've toured facilities, we've had hearings, we've met with officials, we've talked to our colleagues. We've addressed issues all across the spectrum, and I want to thank them for their work, and I want to especially thank my colleague, Mr. Ryan from Ohio, for his partnership and work in bipartisanship to produce the bill before you today. Mr. Ryan never wavered from his commitment to his principles, but was always willing to work to find a solution to the challenges we faced, and I think we produced a bill that we can all agree on today, which is, we know, very difficult in the divided country we live in, to find a bipartisan bill that we can really solve problems and move forward. So without further ado, I present to you the 2018 Appropriations Bill and report to the full committee. As an overview, this legislation focuses on improving constituent services, maintaining important congressional infrastructure, improving security for our constituents, members of Congress and their staff, focusing on transparency, and continuing our commitment to responsible government and spending. The recommendation for FY 2018 Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill provides $3.58 billion, and our bill specifically continues to hold spending on the House operations 12% below the 2010 levels, while adequately funding all operations, even though coming below the requested level. Now, I think I speak for all of us when I express that our heart breaks for Steve Scalise and his family, our colleague from Louisiana, the majority whip on the Republican side, who is still in the hospital recovering from his wounds, as well as Matt Micah, Zach Barth, Crystal Grimes, David Bailey, and everyone on the baseball field a couple of weeks ago that were subjected to attempts to shoot and kill our colleagues, staff, and others. And so this bill attempts to address potential security threats to all of those folks going forward. But no one serving in this body should be fearful that they could be physically attacked, killed, for their political beliefs. And if we allow this to happen, then democracy itself is threatened. So we must improve security for Congress, for the members and the staff and constituents as well who attend our events. First, I'd like to take a moment to actually just really thank our Capitol Police for what they do every day to keep us safe, to keep this building safe, to keep this meeting safe, to keep our constituents who visit us here in the Capitol complex safe, and particularly Crystal Griner and David Bailey. We all know whose heroism showed the country and the world what we see every day, the bravery of the United States Capitol Police Force. They put their lives on the line, protecting the Capitol complex and its roughly 9 million visitors every year. Their courage under fire saved the lives of countless members of Congress, staff, and innocent bystanders, and Steve Scalise, Matt Micah, Zach Barth, and everyone else on that baseball field are alive today because of them. So we owe it to the Capitol Police to ensure they have the necessary resources to meet their mission in an increasingly polarized climate. And after working with Ranking Member Ryan and meeting and working with the Sergeant at Arms, the Capitol Police, I believe this bill appropriately prioritizes those security needs, taking a comprehensive approach to ensuring the safety and security of not only members of Congress, but our staff, and most importantly, the constituents we serve. Our bill adds new resources and changes to Capitol security in a number of areas. We add $7.5 million to the Capitol Police for an increased security posture, particularly related to the Capitol complex and guarding members of Congress and their constituents who attend. $5 million to the House Sergeant at Arms for specifically district office security, and then support for the House administration's authorization to increase by $25,000 the MRA accounts of every member so that they may hire physical security when they are away from the Capitol complex if they so desire. There are also discussions regarding being able to secure personal residences, and there is a pending FEC decision on whether campaign funds can be allowed to do that. So I'm pleased with these recommendations and believe they go a long way towards protecting our members and constituents, and believe they are a comprehensive approach to this issue. Now let's move on to some other important priorities in this bill. Of course, we continue to hold the line on government spending, being responsible with the taxpayer dollars that have been given to us. The bill includes $1.194 billion for the operations of the House, which is $29 million below the request. And we continue to have the level of funding available for the MRA allowances, which will allow authorized levels by the Committee on House Administration. The bill includes $422.5 million for the Capitol Police, which is $29.2 above enacted levels. The funding level will provide the necessary resources for the Capitol Police to hire additional officers for the newly acquired O'Neill House Office Building and the Rayburn Garage Security Initiative, as well as the security priorities that I've previously outlined. We continue to support the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office by allowing the CBO to provide insight to Congress with objective and timely budget and economic impact data, funding them at $48.5 million, a slight increase. We preserve and maintain our infrastructure by prioritizing critical projects with the architecture of the Capitol. We include millions more for the restoration and renovation of the Cannon House office building to continue the next phase of that project. We provide resources for Phase 3 of the Rayburn House office building garage rehab project. We also add resources for a new cooling tower at the Capitol Power Plant, Module 6 collection storage at Fort Meade for the Library of Congress, and $10 million is included for the Historic Building Trust to finance major repairs and renovations to facilities of the House in future years. We also continue to focus on IT modernization, copyright process improvements at the Library of Congress. We include new funding for IT library-wide improvements, including modernization efforts specifically within the Copyright Office. Some of the testimony we heard describes challenges we have at the Copyright Office. Currently, it takes them 18 months to process copyright requests, where the Patent and Trademark Office can do their requests within 48 hours. So we're really working towards modernizing and making more efficient and accessible the Copyright Office to the creative artists that depend on its success in order to do their jobs. We have $117 million for the Government Publishing Office, which is the same as currently enacted at levels, $544 million for the Government Accountability Office, the Congressional watchdog, slightly above the 2017 enacted levels. Other important policies in our bill, which we attempted to work with the numerous requests we received from members of Congress, include new significant transparency provisions, including the publishing of non-confidential CRS reports online, language on the feasibility of publishing IG reports from the GAO, and language related to the publishing of statutes at large historically. We also include language with regard to preventing food waste, investigating ways to donate or compost food produced by food services on the Hill. We have language related to improved food service overall on the Hill, and I can find no more bipartisan consensus than that issue. Member requests to expand the Wounded Warrior Program, allowing members to expand the ability to hire veterans, increasing the total slots available to 85, which is a 57% increase over the current 54% fellowships. And this was a request for many of you across Congress, and it's a great program. We have language related to the Library of Congress's Veteran History Program, funding to achieve IT upgrades at the Library of Congress, as I mentioned, and language in support of the work conducted at the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. So in closing, I'd just like to thank Ranking Member Ryan for his role throughout the process, as well as an appreciation to all the members of the subcommittee for their participation in the process this year. Their work contributed to an excellent final product that I present to you today. I'd like to thank my staff, Liz Dawson, our clerk, and then Tim Monahan and Jenny Pannone from the committee, as well as Joe Ianello on my personal staff, as well as the many staff members that serve Mr. Ryan and the minority party as well. Finally, I'd like to thank Chairman Fraylinghausen and Ranking Member Lowy for their trust and confidence in their work to support the bill, and I urge all of you to support our final product.
Thank you, Chairman Yoder, for a great job on this bill. Pleased to yield to Mr. Ryan, Ranking Member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first thank you and Ms. Lowy for your cooperation throughout this process. I also want to thank Chairman Yoder for our first dance here at the Appropriations Committee. And I want to reiterate, as I said during the subcommittee markup, I really appreciate the way you run this subcommittee. It's been a very good process. You took your time to have my input, and I think the input of many members here, and we appreciate that. I think given the circumstances over the last few weeks, this bill, I think, reflects us trying to come together in a bipartisan way. So I can't thank you enough for that process. And I know the working relationship between our staffs have been good and very collaborative and bipartisan as well. I'd like to thank Liz Dawson, Jenny Pannone, and Tim Monahan from your staff. I also want to thank Joe Iannola from your office, Adam Berg on the minority staff, Ann Sokoloff and Ryan Keating from my staff. As a former staffer, I know how hard they worked on this bill through the nights and through the weekends. So it has been noted, and I don't want to reiterate too much what Chairman Yoder has said, this bill appropriates before us $3.58 billion for the legislative branch of the federal government, excluding the Senate, a 2.87% increase. It provides $1.194 billion for the House of Representatives, which is the same level as fiscal year 2017, plus $5 million extra given to the Sergeant at Arms for the security of members, staff, and visitors to our offices in light of the recent tragic shooting at the Congressional baseball practice. I'm thankful that our colleague, Congressman Scalise, is improving. The officers and staff who you mentioned by name are recovering, and no one other than the attacker was killed. And hopefully with these resources, we can prevent the next potential incident entirely. The bill also provides $347 million for the Capitol Police, a $29 million increase, which includes $7.5 million for overtime, equipment, and training requested in the wake of the shooting, as well as the funding for the police that the police asked for to bring on more civilians and the maximum number of new sworn officers next year. Our goal is to give them the resources they need to maintain security on the Capitol campus and also increase their coverage of members and gatherings of members that might be targeted. As I noted at the subcommittee markup, and as I'm sure my colleagues understand as acutely as I do, the recent shooting has made everyone out there realize how few of us actually have detail protection. Until this month, there was definitely an impression among the public that we all had men with dark glasses and earpieces guarding us. Now that the news accounts that flooded media outlets over the past several weeks of the shooting, it has become abundantly clear that that's not the case unless you're in leadership. There's no telling how many unbalanced people out there might want to try and take a shot at one of us. And as we move forward with prioritizing the use of additional security money, I hope we will take care to evaluate what the best uses of our limited resources are, and also whether added flexibility is warranted to permit each of us to use those dollars in the manner most appropriate for our individual circumstances. Some may need those resources for district offices. Some may need them for their home. And it's the responsibility of the House, using the funds provided in this bill, to look out for our safety and the safety of our constituents. And so I'm pleased that the bill gives $2 million more than last year, also to the Congressional Budget Office. The architect of the Capitol receives $577 million, a 9% increase over last year. The Library of Congress and its sub-agencies, Congressional Research Service and the Copyright Office, are given sorely needed increases for IT modernization. I want to thank the chairman and the committee for that. The bill provides $648 million, which is a $16 million increase compared to last year. I would have preferred maybe we came a little bit closer to the budget request, which would have allowed the library and CRS to meet their personnel needs in addition to their technological needs. And we do meet the request of the Copyright Office. And based on what I've learned about copyright's needs since joining this Ledge Branch subcommittee, I'm convinced that's a good thing. The Government Publishing Office, Open World, and the Stennis Center all received the same level of funding as last year. So, Mr. Chairman, I sincerely hope when we get to conference we can maybe talk about the Government Accountability Office for more generously offering them some resources. I think we need that oversight and those opportunities that GAO provides, and because of the funding, we will see almost 200 fewer staffers at the end of the year there. I will also repeat what I said at our subcommittee markup, that even a bill worthy of support, as this one is, should be part of a coherent budget strategy. We talked about that during Ms. Lowy's amendment. It doesn't appear that there is one yet, and we hope that we can sit down and recognize how important it is for all of us to not only fund this bill, defense bill, and maybe one or two others, but also NIH funding, jobs programs, and the rest. So in closing, I urge my colleagues to join me in voting to report this bill favorably out. And again, I want to thank Chairman Yoder, congratulate him on a job well done, thank his staff once more, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan and Mr. Yoder, for your comments and your hard work together. All of us are deeply appreciative to both of you and your members and the staff for their work on this bill. The dramatic event of June 14th has put today's markup in a new light, and we certainly feel a renewed sense of gratitude to the Capitol Police. Their bravery is extraordinary and was extraordinary, and we're lucky to have them protecting this building and millions of people who pass through its doors every year. The Capitol represents what makes this country great. It's a symbol of freedom and democracy. Whatever we can do to keep people who work in and visit this institution safe, we need to do. I'm very pleased to say that this bill does just that. As Chairman Yoder highlighted, the bill totals $3.58 billion to maintain the functions of the legislative branch, including a lot of operations of the House and support agencies. These funding increases, as we've heard, are targeted towards security and safety improvements in and around the Capitol complex, including bolstering security of the O'Neill and Rayburn buildings and enhancing the safety of district offices to protect the people who visit us at home for help and constituent work. The bill also increases funding to address aging and damaged facilities within the complex that will help protect the safety and health of members, staff, and visitors. Lastly, critical funding is targeted towards strengthening cybersecurity, protecting our IT systems against those who would do us harm. And people are constantly attacking our IT systems. These investments are necessary, and I'm glad we're able to support this work with this bill. I'm also pleased that the legislative branch continues to lead by example, demonstrating fiscal restraint while providing important services to the people we represent. That includes maintaining the freeze on member pay, which some might disagree with, that has been in place since 2010. At the same time, funding for the Government Accountability Office is prioritized, ensuring Congress has detailed and accurate data on how taxpayers' dollars are spent, which allows us to do our oversight duties. We're honored as members of Congress to come to this building every day with the charge of representing the will of the American people. This bill allows us to do so in a way we can all be united together. Thank the Chairman and Ranking Member, Subcommittee, and be happy to recognize Ms. Lowy for any comments she may wish to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Yoder, Ranking Member Ryan. We all really appreciate the hard work on this bill. The legislative branch bill takes on added importance this year, excuse me, given the tragic shooting at the Congressional baseball practice. Our thoughts and prayers remain with Majority Whip Steve Scalise and all those who were injured by this senseless violence. The shooting served as a reminder that we must be vigilant in protecting this institution and its members, staff, and constituents that visit in D.C. and in the districts. Despite the added importance of this year's bill, I'm deeply concerned that we are considering it haphazardly without any apparent plan to complete the 2018 budget and appropriations process. It is nearly July, and no budget resolution exists. No bipartisan talks are ongoing to raise budget caps so that appropriations law can be enacted. And there is no apparent plan to keep the government funded and avoid a catastrophic debt default in the fall. My amendment on the defense bill earlier today highlighted the Republican unwillingness to be transparent with the American people and produce a full budget showing its spending on all appropriation bills. Now, on to the bill before us. The legislative branch appropriations bill would provide $3.58 billion for fiscal year 2018, excluding the Senate, a $100 million increase above current levels and $228 million below the budget request. The bill provides a $29.2 million increase for Capitol Police and a $5 million increase for the Sergeant at Arms for 72 new officers, improved security not only for members, but especially for constituents and staff in our district offices. While these investments are extremely important, I cannot say that everything in this bill is positive. The Government Accountability Office would receive $568.3 million for FY 2018, $46.2 million less than its budget request. It is irresponsible, in my judgment, to underfund the GAO, especially when administration officials have reportedly been ordered not to comply with Democratic oversight requests. Yet, at this funding level, GAO would have over 200 fewer staff by year's end, undermining its ability to conduct oversight and ensure taxpayer dollars are well spent. Despite my misgivings, I would like to once again thank the chairman and ranking member for their hard work on this bill. I look forward to continuing to work with them as the bill progresses.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. I believe there is any further discussion. We're not recognizing amendments yet, but I want to recognize.
I just want to speak on.
Oh, please, Ms. Lee.
Very quickly. First, I want to thank the chairman and our ranking member and our subcommittees and our chairs for this bill, even though we still are with the same issue with regard to not knowing what we're dealing with in terms of numbers. I want to thank you for it. I want to call to your attention a couple of issues that I've been raising for several years. First, we all are saluting today the Capitol Police. I personally know how brave they are, their courage, and I thank them for everything. And thinking about Steve and all of those who were injured, this subcommittee has really honored them through their recovery, their difficult recovery, by stepping up and doing some things for everyone. The $25,000 is so important in this for security outside of the Capitol, and I want to raise one issue that a lot of members weren't aware of. When we have events, Congress on the corner, rallies, town meetings, on the official side, we have not been able to use our MRA for securing our staff nor our constituents. Oftentimes, local police will show up, sheriff's departments will show up and help. Oftentimes, they just won't because they're very busy. And so finally, we have an opportunity now where we believe that these large events require security and we don't have local assistance. We'll be able to use our MRA for that. And that is so important, again, not just for members, but for staff and for constituents. So thank you all for that. Secondly, with regard to the Library of Congress and expanded outreach for the Veterans History Project, we've made some changes so that minority veteran service organizations are part of this process, as well as more inclusive now for the Library of Congress to collaborate with minority serving institutions for this outreach historical project. So thank you again for giving me a chance to mention these two issues.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Any further discussion, general discussion on the bill? If not, recognize, excuse me, Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I again want to compliment Chairman Yoder and Ranking Member Ryan for this bill. I just want to place on the record the following information, that in terms of the number of cyber intrusions that we were able to prevent here in the House, in 2016 alone amounted to over $4.7 billion.
For waiving of the reading.
Okay. Okay, well, hearing of your support, that should be a good vote here.
Let's hope so, Mr. Chairman.
Questions
Testing
on the
my mettle.
manager's amendment? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment's approved. Any further amendments? I see both of you got up about the same time. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk. No, I only have one amendment.
May we consider it read?
Yes, because I'll read part of it myself. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I raised today to offer an amendment to create a more orderly process for making the Congressional Research Service reports available to the American people. CRS exists to provide nonpartisan research to Congress, and I agree. I want everybody to hear this loud and clear. I agree that public transparency and about the non-confidential reports is a good thing. And Mr. Quigley has been working on this for a while, and I congratulate him for the work that he's been doing to make this more transparent. However, I have a challenging problem with the report language. It directs CRS to make these reports public, but at the same time, we're providing no additional funding to CRS for staff or resources to carry out this requirement. And since 2010, CRS has had a $4.6 million, not adjusted for inflation, cut to its budget. And I'm concerned that we could be increasing the workload for CRS analysis and transform CRS into a very public-facing agency instead of one's primary mission is to be making sure that it's doing the research and producing reports and all the information that we're asking for when we're in session. I don't know about you now, but sometimes they can't get back to you really fast right now. So my amendment is working to prevent a problem. My amendment directs CRS to submit a plan with recommendations on a official website for the U.S. federal legislative information. The site provides access to accurate and timely and complete legislative information for members of Congress, legislative agencies, and the public. It's presented by the Library of Congress using the data from the Office of the Clerk of the House of Representatives and the Office of the Secretary of the Senate, the Government Publishing Office and the Congressional Budget Office, and the Library of Congress Research, Congressional Research. Folks, I just want to have a discussion. Where's the best place to put it? Where is the best use of people power? I am not objecting to making these reports public, as I have gotten phone calls, and I'm sure your office has. In full transparency, if you look at what my amendment does, you have it in front of you, and I ask you to start looking at line 13, and I quote from the amendment, "Such a plan should include a discussion of having public access to CRS reports occur through websites maintained by the Clerk of the House and the Secretary of the Senate in keeping with CRS's mandate to provide nonpartisan research to Congress." Folks, I just want to have a discussion. We didn't have a hearing on this. We didn't do any kind of a big markup. And I just want to have a discussion. Should it be in CRS and we make it a more publicly facing agency, or should we put it in the public-facing website that we have right now, which is congress.gov? Folks, I ask for your consideration on this, and I do mean this sincerely. Mr. Quigley has worked very hard in making this information more readily available to the public, and I wholeheartedly support that. My dilemma is that I think we should have a discussion when CRS is funded at $4.7 million, not adjusted for inflation, than it is at 2010, and we're on hold, whether or not we should put this into CRS, or if we should have CRS do a report on this and see if it makes more sense to put it on congress.gov. And with that, I yield back, and I'd ask your sincere consideration.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Any further discussion on the McCollum amendment? Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the concerns that the author of this amendment raises, but I strongly oppose her efforts here. It basically, let's not forget what it does. It takes the direction out of this. And there are certain people who should get credit for the fact that we've gotten this far. Mr. Ridgel is no longer serving with us, but he was very helpful. The discussion on this has taken place 3 years now, right here. Right? And if anyone has gone to the transparency hearings and listened to the Sunlight Foundation and many other groups talk about this for years, the discussion has played out. The concerns that many have raised about making CRS reports have been discussed and addressed, and we are giving in a 90-day plan CRS the opportunity to get into all of those details to the extent possible. So let's just remember where we are right now. Taxpayers pay for these reports twice, because typically what's had to happen is, A, they pay for them to be prepared. But what happened is there was sort of a cottage industry that sprung up where you could go online and buy these things and then pay some second source who was making additional money for these things. And it's true, there is another site that sprung up that's trying to do this for free, but that takes congressional staff to actually make all those copies and make it available, which is just, you know, unless you give them that authority and the resources, they can't do that forever. And what if that member leaves, as we all do eventually, there's no one feeding into it. So any and all of these concerns, with all due respect, can be raised. But I think we need to move, and I appreciate Mr. Yoder's efforts to move this forward. We need to move on a bipartisan basis. We sometimes argue about whether we're transparent or not. It would be nice to move forward on something as important as this, right? Why are we making the decisions we're making? What are we basing those decisions on? CRS is a very thoughtful source to base those decisions. Let's not take the directive out of this that we just put in for the very first time. Let's move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Before you, I think Mr. Yoder wished to be recognized. Chairman Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the McCollum amendment and appreciate her work to try to perfect this in terms of her perspective. We believe the costs associated with implementation of this policy to be minimal with CRS. Numerous outside organizations already published these reports, have made the committee aware of the inexpensive or open source solutions currently available that CRS could already leverage. So the report this language calls for will identify specific costs for implementation. So we believe we should go forward. We think the resources are there. But, this has been a controversial issue. I know the committee's debated it a number of years. Regardless of where you are in terms of this thing, these reports are already available for the public. They just can't easily find them. And they have to pay in many cases. We noted that third parties are profiting off of CRS reports by charging a fee to access them. For example, Amazon.com has hundreds of CRS reports for sale. One example is the Congressional Appropriations Process, an introduction. Written by CRS is on sale for $19.95 right now. A few of us may want to buy that. You know who you are. That's on sale. So our constituents, to Mr. Quigley's point, are having to buy this research twice. It's not that these reports aren't going to be available at some point. It's just that they're going to be available through lobbyists or third parties or through difficult to find sources. We ought to do the right thing here. We ought to go forward and be transparent. We ought to provide our constituents with the same information that's being provided to us. They've paid for this once. They shouldn't have to go pay for it a second time. I think it's the right thing to do. And I want to commend Mr. Quigley. You mentioned Mr. Ridgell, Mr. Lance from New Jersey. There's been a number of people who've worked on this a long time. This is an idea whose time has come, and I'm proud to support it. I'd ask you to oppose the McCollum Amendment and move forward in a bipartisan fashion to be more transparent to our constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Yoder. The ranking member, Mr. Ryan, for any comments
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief comment. I want to reluctantly oppose the amendment as well. Mr. Quigley convinced me of this issue over the last year or two. And I think it is appropriate for us to be more transparent. I think the example that the chairman gave is probably the best illustration of why we need to do this. But I certainly do recognize the concerns. And as this bill moves forward, maybe we can address some of those concerns. Yield back.
Any further discussion before I recognize Ms. McCollum to close? Anybody else? Ms. McCollum.
Chairman, and I think everybody knows where I stand on the transparency and making this public. But I think sometimes when we are moving through and doing things, quite often we're in a hurry to get on a plane to come home or to do something else, or, we have constituents to meet. We're busy when we're here. But we need to slow down, in my opinion, sometimes and look around at what's on here. I believe that we should be talking to the government printing office. I think we should be talking to, as I mentioned, the Secretary of the Senate and what we do here in the House, so that when we provide this to our constituents, we provide the best one-stop shopping. Now, I'm not going to say that I have every great idea that's out here, and maybe we're having a discussion right now and, people aren't agreeing with me. That's fine. But we should be able to have the discussion. So, Mr. Chair, let me close with this. The calls that my office got today saying that I was against transparency, I was against moving forward, when nothing could have been farther from the truth of a daughter of a librarian. I proudly serve in this institution. I want to protect the library. I want to make sure that it has all the resources it needs. And I would ask the chairman and the ranking member, if we hear from the Library of Congress that they need additional resources to do this, or they find that there's a cheaper way to do it within the House so it's public, that we do that, because I don't want to see any further cuts to CRS. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McCullum. The question is on the McCullum amendment. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the nays have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments? Ms. Lee, did you have one?
Amendment is Lee, amendment number 1 as modified.
The clerk will read. May she read, please? Thank you.
An amendment offered by Ms. Lee as modified. Insert at the appropriate place in the committee report the following. The committee...
The members haven't seen the modified amendment. If she may proceed.
The committee recognizes that structural changes must be made to improve diversity and inclusion in the House of Representatives so that the people who serve America reflect its diversity. The committee directs the Chief Administrative Officer to issue a report no later than 90 days after the date of enactment of this act, addressing the ways in which members and staff can be given the tools, who have hiring and management responsibility, can be given the tools to combat unconscious bias in hiring and promotion, and with education on the negative impact of bias.
Ms. Lee is recognized for 5 minutes to discuss her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for reading the amendment. And basically, I think that we can agree that staff who works for us in the House of Representatives should reflect the diversity in America in every respect. And my amendment merely tries to pave the way for that. One way to combat our individual bias is through many ways. One is unconscious bias training, which teaches individuals to recognize their bias and provide tools to mitigate the bias that might be against gender, age, ethnicity, culture, education, what college one attended. Again, diversity in many, many ways. Training to combat bias might include teaching individuals to slow down, question their assumptions, and seek more information in their interview or resume review process. The private sector has already recognized that unconscious bias is a problem, and many have embraced training to rectify their management policies in order to maximize profits. So my amendment, it's common sense. It's about the first step to ensure that our hiring practices match really the gold standard that the private sector and other nonprofits have adopted. We need to adapt to understanding and utilizing the most current the most current techniques and strategies to ensure inclusion. I ask for an aye vote.
Any further discussion? Otherwise, I'm going to recognize Chairman Yoder. I recognize Chairman Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Ms. Lee for bringing this discussion to the committee, and we've worked with her to perfect the language, and I appreciate her raising important issues, and we have no objection to the amendment. Thank you.
So do we need a vote on this? Or? Questions on the amendment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The committee, opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The Lee amendments as modified is approved. Ms. Wasserman-Schultz is recognized.
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read.
An amendment offered
I
by...
ask unanimous consent that it be considered as read.
Consider it done. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer an amendment that would increase the Historic Buildings Preservation Revitalization Trust Fund from $10 million, which the current mark has, to $17 million, which is a $7 million increase. That would bring it up to the amount of funding that we provided in the trust fund in FY17. Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, I realize many of you were not on this committee back in 2007 when I was the chair of the Legislative Branch Subcommittee, and we inherited a project that grew in budget with the Capitol Visitor Center fourfold to nearly $600 million. It was massive. There were massive cost overruns. It took years and years beyond when it was supposed to ultimately be finished. With the help of my ranking members through numerous Congresses, we held hearings each month to hold the former architect of the Capitol accountable to the newly agreed upon schedule and budget. We also brought in GAO to work with the committee staff to look at construction milestones. Frankly, that project was an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment and a reflection on us as a United States Congress for not being good fiscal stewards of the project and the resources that were spent on it. It was an example of ballooning government projects that are too big to fail and that pull resources away from other worthy initiatives. In the legislative branch bill, we can least afford massive cost overruns like that one. The hope was that when we created the Revitalization Trust Fund, that we could bank funds for future large-scale projects and not have a repeat of the CVC. The original idea was that we would look 10 to 20 years down the road and save appropriately to ensure that the smallest appropriations bill did not have to absorb such large projects at the detriment of other worthy programs. For several years, we banked between $30 and $70 million, and then the cannon restoration project began. The chair in the last Congress and I made a decision to move $162 million from the trust fund to a separate cannon line item so that we could have transparency over the restoration of that building. Unfortunately, since that transfer, we have not returned to appropriately saving for the future. Cannon has rightfully received significant funds to continue the restoration, but the trust fund has been left with what I believe is inadequate funds. I don't believe that the architect put any analysis into the $10 million that he requested for the trust fund. And I want you to think about it in this way. Saving rather than spending is hard. There is no correlation between what the architect asked for and what our projected future costs are and what we need to do to plan for potential future cost overruns. If we only save $100 million over the next 10 years, we will be left to pay for the next House office building restoration with massive new budget authority rather than the banking that we have accomplished in this trust fund. If we use the cannon restoration as our guide for what our projected costs are, the Longworth and Rayburn buildings could be well over $800 million if they require full restorations. Now, just to predict for you whether that's likely, the Longworth building is actually rated in fair condition, and the Rayburn building is rated in poor condition. So I would imagine that we are going to see the hundreds of millions of dollars for each of those buildings coming down the pike. So the offset that I would use in this amendment, and again, this is $7 million, is the storage module unit number 6, the budget for which in the Library of Congress has $45 million. That $45 million cannot be spent in this fiscal year, and we can easily make up the difference next year. It is important that we continue to be fiscally responsible, good fiscal stewards of the construction projects that are our responsibility, and make sure that over the long haul, we aren't in a position where we are going to have to shortchange the rest of the agencies in this bill, which are repeatedly and continuously shortchanged so often. And these are the agencies that serve this institution. So I ask my colleagues for their support of this amendment.
I thank the gentlewoman for her comments on her amendment. Mr. Yoder is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Ms. Wasserman Schultz bringing this amendment. She came to speak with me yesterday about it on the floor, and I know she's been a longtime advocate of providing additional resources to the trust fund. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to oppose the amendment today. The amendment today would increase by $7 million the request that we have fully filled from the architect of the Capitol, who has assessed what he thinks is the necessary amount to add to this trust fund. So to go from 10 to 17 million would be in excess of 7 million more than the architect has requested. And those $7 million would come from other project funds at the Library of Congress. So we'd be essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. We'd be moving from other construction projects. While I understand the importance of funding this reserve fund, to direct it from a current capital construction purpose that we know we're going to go forward with and short it by 20%, to put it in a fund that we don't know what we're going to spend it on, to me, is actually some of the short-sightedness that I think the amendment sponsor is attempting to attack. And so I think the amendment is unnecessary, might cost us more money long-term if we'd have to delay the Library of Congress project at worst, and at best, it would just force us to have to take money from other Library of Congress projects to fund. And so while I respect Ms. Wasserman Schultz's intentions, and I believe we need to continue to add money to the Historic Revitalization Trust Fund. We have fully met the request from the architect of the Capitol, and this would create further uncertainty, and I believe is unnecessary. I'd like to yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for his comments. The chairman, any further discussion? Mr. Ryan.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. I know Ms. Wasserman Schultz has talked to both of us about this. I think it's altogether appropriate. I think she laid out the argument for why this would be appropriate for us, and I think it gives us a broader, I think, appreciation for the issues that Ms. Wasserman Schultz faced as chairman, that we face today, that I hope this committee becomes very, very aware of. We have a lot of work to do here on this Capitol, in the Capitol grounds, and we've got to figure out a way to get this stuff done. And it's not just security measures, but it's taking care of the greatest Capitol that's ever existed in the history of God's green earth. And we have a responsibility to take care of it and to do it in a smart way. And I talked a little bit in subcommittee that we need to figure out some creative financing to help make these projects happen. I think we need to look into and exploring how we can potentially bond some of these projects so we're not dragging our feet where it takes years, where the cost of labor, the cost of materials, the cost of everything else goes up as we try to accomplish our goals here. Let's figure out creative ways to get it done and explore those opportunities. So in support of this amendment, I yield back the ball.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Any further discussion? Gentlewoman's recognized to close on her amendment.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, before I close, I would just ask the chairman if he would be willing to at least recognize that the architect, while he might have requested this $10 million, did not adequately assess what the needs are, and that we work with the architect and with one another to try to make sure that over the next number of years, in which we have hundreds of millions of dollars in restoration funding that we need to provide, that we not that be penny wise and pound foolish. And so I would hope that the chairman was willing to work with me to do that.
Certainly be happy to.
Mr. Yoder's recognized. Is the gentlewoman suggesting we not have a vote on this and you'll be working with the chairman, or?
It would depend on what the chairman's answer was.
Okay. What's the chairman have to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, for yielding. I would be certainly happy to work with you and the architect, and I think you have raised a concern we all have, as well as Mr. Ryan, to try to provide long-term planning for how we prepare to fund capital construction projects so we're not caught behind and then have to spend money foolishly. And so I'd be happy to, if the gentleman would like to withdraw the amendment, be happy to meet with the architect, figure out what we think the adequate number is, and make sure that the committee meets that objective.
Okay. With that assurance, I'd be happy to withdraw the amendment.
We all commend you for your working relationship. Thank you very much with Mr. Ryan. Any further amendments? There being no further amendments, I recognize the distinguished former chairman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to favorably report the Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2018 to the full House.
Okay. I've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion's agreed to, and we have some minority views. Will be 3 days. And do we have a unanimous? Oh, okay. Unanimous consent. Don't go anywhere. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be given the authority to make technical and conforming changes to the items approved today. Without objection, so ordered. If there are no further business, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you all for being here and your participation.